The auditorium was buzzing with excitement. It was the annual Silicon Valley Science Summit, a gathering of the brightest minds in technology, engineering, and innovation. People from all over the world had come to witness groundbreaking ideas, bold predictions, and of course, to hear from the one and only Elon Musk. But today wasn't just any normal day. Today, something unexpected was about to happen. Elon Musk, the visionary behind SpaceX and Tesla, had just finished a captivating talk about the future of artificial intelligence and space exploration. His words were met with applause, his charm and intellect undeniable. Musk was used to being the smartest person in the room. After all, he had revolutionized multiple industries and changed the course of human history. But today, things were about to change. In the back of the room, a small hand shot up. It was a child, a boy, no more than 8 years old, wearing a t-shirt and glasses. His name was Ben, and he had been attending the conference with his parents, who were renowned mathematicians. The audience barely noticed him at first, distracted by the tech mogul on stage. But then, Ben stood up, his voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "Mr. Musk," he said, "I have a question for you." The room went silent. Musk, ever the showman, raised an eyebrow and turned his attention to the young boy. "Go ahead, kid," he said with a smile. "What's on your mind?" The audience leaned forward, intrigued. Was this a fan of Musk's work, or was this just another random question from an overenthusiastic child? But what happened next was unlike anything anyone could have expected. "I think I've figured out something that's going to be a challenge for you," Ben said, grinning with a glint of mischief in his eyes. "I'm a big fan of your work, Mr. Musk, but there's a math problem I've been working on that I think you can't solve. I dare you to try." The crowd gasped. Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur, the man who had sent rockets into space, taken electric cars to new heights, and had ideas about colonizing Mars, was being challenged by an 8-year-old. It was the kind of spectacle that could only happen in a place like Silicon Valley, where ambition and imagination ran wild. Musk chuckled, clearly amused. "All right, kid. I've got to admit, this is a first. You've got my attention. What's the problem?" Ben's grin widened, and he pulled a small notebook from his backpack. He flipped through a few pages and then, with the precision of a seasoned mathematician, wrote out a complex equation on the chalkboard that had been set up for questions and answers. "Here you go, Mr. Musk," Ben said, stepping back from the board. "Solve this." The equation was unlike anything Musk had seen in years, a mix of advanced algebra, number theory, and a touch of calculus. It was clear that this wasn't something that a typical 8-year-old would just know how to write. This was a kid who had already mastered concepts that most university students would struggle to understand. Musk stared at the equation for a moment, his mind racing. He had always been proud of his intellectual prowess, but this was beyond anything he had encountered. The equation wasn't just challenging. It was designed to push the boundaries of even the sharpest minds. The audience was silent, waiting for Musk to respond. Would he brush it off as a joke? Would he play along and humor the boy? Or would he take the challenge seriously? For a moment, the room was frozen in time. Musk's eyes narrowed as he began to break down the equation. His fingers drummed lightly on the podium, a sign of his thinking process. It wasn't that he couldn't understand the mathematics. He had a brilliant mind, after all, but this puzzle was different. It wasn't a typical engineering problem, something he could solve with logic and experience. This was pure, raw math, the kind of problem that required an entirely different set of skills. The question on everyone's mind was clear. Could Musk solve it? And more importantly, would he accept the challenge? "All right, Ben," Musk said after a long pause, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "I'll give it a shot, but I'm going to need some time." Ben's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Musk. I'll be waiting." Musk took a deep breath and began to work through the equation. His mind shifted into gear, recalling everything he had learned in his younger years about math. But even as he scribbled down his first few calculations, something inside of him knew this wasn't going to be as easy as solving a rocket trajectory or optimizing battery technology. This was going to be different. The crowd leaned in, eager to see how the showdown would unfold. Would Elon Musk, the billionaire genius who had changed the world, come out on top? Or was this young boy, who was only 8 years old, about to prove that sometimes brilliance knows no age. Ben, Musk said after a few moments of silent calculation, looking up from the board, I have to admit, you've got my attention. But don't get too excited, this isn't over yet. And with that, the challenge had officially begun. The crowd was buzzing with excitement. They couldn't wait to see who would emerge victorious in this battle of wits, a billionaire tech mogul or an 8-year-old math genius. What was about to happen next? Would Musk crack under the pressure? Would Ben's genius prevail? Or was there something else in store? Stay tuned. This showdown was just getting started. The room was electric with anticipation. People whispered in hushed tones, watching Elon Musk closely as he bent over the chalkboard, trying to solve the problem laid out by the young prodigy, Ben. Musk's brow furrowed in concentration, his mind racing to piece together the complex equation. For a man who was accustomed to solving some of the most complicated engineering problems in the world, this felt different. This wasn't just about rocket science or cutting-edge technology. It was pure, raw mathematics. Ben, on the other hand, sat back down in his seat, his eyes fixed on Musk with an expression of quiet confidence. The little boy was no stranger to being underestimated. At just 8 years old, he had already accomplished things that most people would only dream of. Ben had been solving advanced calculus problems by the time he was 6 and had received personal recognition from some of the leading mathematicians in the world. Yet, despite his extraordinary abilities, he remained humble and kind, more focused on learning and sharing knowledge than gaining attention. His parents, both renowned professors in the field of mathematics, had always nurtured his natural gift, providing him with the resources and challenges to grow. But it wasn't just the equations that fascinated Ben. It was the way the world worked, the way everything in the universe seemed to operate on some kind of hidden mathematical rhythm. Ben's mother, Dr. Claire Henderson, had always told him that math was the key to unlocking the mysteries of the world. It was why, even at such a young age, he could handle equations that baffled university professors. And today, he was about to test that theory in front of a room full of the brightest minds in the world. As Musk continued to scribble numbers on the chalkboard, he could feel the weight of the challenge pressing on him. This wasn't just about winning. This was about his own intellectual pride, his ego. Musk was used to being the smartest person in the room, but here, in this moment, he felt uncertain. Come on, Musk. You've faced worse than this, he muttered to himself under his breath, trying to push through the mental fog. But as he reached for the eraser to start over, he glanced up at Ben. The boy was watching him, his face serene, but there was a quiet, almost knowing smile on his lips. It was as if Ben knew something Musk didn't. It was unsettling, but Musk had faced far greater challenges before, just not in this arena. The equation on the board seemed to mock him. It was a delicate mix of abstract algebra and number theory, with an intricate twist at the end, a pattern buried in the numbers that only someone who had a true gift for numbers could see. The crowd was still as a statue, hanging on every move Musk made. Musk paused for a moment. Was he missing something? Or was there another way to approach this that he hadn't considered? As much as his mind raced, he couldn't help but think back to his own school days, the moments when he was in classrooms struggling with problems that felt impossible. He was the kind of student who never gave up, who kept pushing until the answer appeared. But this was different. It was then that something shifted inside of him. Maybe it was the crowd, the intensity of the moment, or maybe it was the thought of an 8-year-old beating him that lit a fire inside of him. But Musk decided to push forward with his own method, one that worked for him in everything he had done. Combining creativity with logic, he began to simplify the equation, breaking it down piece by piece. Musk had never been afraid of tackling problems from unconventional angles, and this would be no different. Slowly but surely, he started seeing patterns that hadn't been immediately apparent. Ben, watching intently, could see Musk's process unfold. He had seen that same determination in others who were trying to solve the problem, but none of them had quite the ingenuity that Musk did. The billionaire was approaching the problem like an engineer, not just a mathematician, which gave him a unique edge. Still, Ben's mind worked differently. He had spent years teaching himself advanced math outside of the classroom, absorbing concepts in ways that no one else could quite grasp. And while Musk might be able to solve this in his own time, Ben knew that the solution to the equation wasn't just about reaching the right answer. It was about seeing beyond the numbers. It was about unlocking a deeper understanding of the problem, the way one might look at a puzzle and realize that the pieces fit together in an entirely new way. The tension in the room began to mount as the clock ticked down. Everyone could feel the weight of the moment. Elon Musk, one of the greatest minds of his generation, was locked in a silent battle with an 8-year-old math genius. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Musk stepped back from the chalkboard. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and took a deep breath, stepping away from the equation. The room was still. Ben stood up. "You're getting close, Mr. Musk," he said quietly, his voice filled with respect. "But you're missing one key element." Musk, sweating slightly, turned to the boy. "What element?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with a mix of curiosity and frustration. Ben smiled gently. "The answer isn't in the equation itself," he said. "It's in the relationship between the numbers. You need to think of it as a story, not just numbers and symbols. They're telling you something, but you need to hear it." The crowd was silent, waiting for Musk to process the words. Musk's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, he felt a rush of realization flood over him. Ben was right. The numbers weren't just a puzzle to be solved. They were a language that Musk had never been taught to understand in the way Ben had. Elon Musk, the titan of innovation, suddenly realized that he was in the presence of something far more profound than just a gifted child. Ben wasn't just solving problems. He was seeing the world through a lens that most people never would. Musk let out a deep breath, a smile spreading across his face. "You know, kid," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "I've always thought of myself as someone who can solve just about anything. But you've just shown me how little I know." Ben shrugged modestly. "I'm just a kid, Mr. Musk. I have a lot to learn too." Musk chuckled and turned back to the chalkboard, this time with a new perspective. It wasn't just about solving the problem. It was about learning from the process. And maybe, just maybe, there was something bigger than winning. It was about the journey and the people you met along the way. The crowd erupted into applause, not because Musk had solved the problem, but because they had witnessed something far more significant. A meeting of minds, a moment where brilliance was no longer defined by age, but by vision. And the ultimate question was, could Musk solve it? Or was there more to this challenge than anyone realized? The applause reverberated through the auditorium, but it wasn't for Elon Musk. It was for the boy, Ben, whose quiet brilliance had just left a billionaire titan of technology questioning his own intellectual limits. The audience was still processing the weight of what had just happened. Musk had been outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old math prodigy, and yet, there was a mutual respect now that hadn't existed before. Ben stood still, his gaze locked on the chalkboard, where Musk was now circling certain parts of the equation. The complexity of it hadn't hit him all at once. No, it was something deeper, an insight that Ben had seen from the start. For Musk, it was a revelation. For Ben, it was just another puzzle to solve, just another way to connect the pieces of a greater pattern. The room quieted, and Musk slowly turned toward the crowd. "All right," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You all saw it. The kid is onto something. But I can't just let this go. Not yet." Ben smiled, stepping forward, his small hands tucked behind his back. "I didn't expect you to," he said, "but you were close. The answer isn't just about solving the numbers. It's about understanding how they work together." Musk gave a short laugh, clearly impressed. "I see now. I've always solved problems, but this feels different. It's like a puzzle that I can't quite figure out, but I'm determined to understand it." Ben nodded. "Exactly. Sometimes, the right answer isn't the one you expect. It's about seeing the connections. You have to think about math like music. It's all about the rhythm and flow." Musk was intrigued. His mind raced through this new analogy. Music. A rhythm. Suddenly, the equation on the chalkboard began to look less like a jumble of numbers and more like a composition. Something with structure, with rules, and most importantly, with a pattern. That's something I never thought of," Musk said slowly. He turned to the audience. "You're all familiar with the way I approach problems, engineering, technology, rockets. It's very linear, very structured. But math, like Ben said, it's not always like that. It's about connections. It's fluid. Ben's eyes sparkled, pleased that Musk was starting to grasp his perspective. I'm just giving you the starting point. The rest is up to you. Musk's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked almost human. The challenge, which had started as a way to demonstrate his own intellectual prowess, was now a journey of discovery, a path that was less about winning and more about the process of learning and growing. Ben's parents, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, exchanged a glance. They had known this day would come. Ben had always been driven to share his love of math with the world, to push the boundaries of what was possible, but they had no idea it would happen like this, in front of a room filled with some of the world's most brilliant minds. Claire Henderson, Ben's mother, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and awe. Her son had always been gifted, but there was something extraordinary about watching him interact with someone like Musk. He wasn't intimidated by the billion-dollar mogul. Instead, he was teaching Musk something that the world's greatest minds often overlooked: the beauty of simplicity in the complex world of mathematics. As the silence stretched on, Musk returned to the board, his focus now sharper than ever. The audience could sense the shift in energy. This wasn't just a contest. It was a partnership. Musk, once the undisputed master of problem-solving, was now collaborating with the young genius in front of him, working together to crack the code. Ben's eyes twinkled as he watched Musk's method evolve. "You're almost there," Ben said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet assurance. "It's not just about the numbers. It's about how you look at them." Musk paused again, his fingers hovering above the chalkboard. He was close, closer than he had been a moment ago, but something still felt elusive. A feeling nagged at him, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Ben, sensing the hesitation, stepped closer to the board. "Mr. Musk," he said, looking at the billionaire with a calm demeanor, "you're thinking too much about the numbers themselves. You need to think about how they interact." Musk's face lit up as if a light bulb had gone off in his head. "Of course," he exclaimed, slapping the chalk down with a sudden burst of energy. "It's not about breaking the equation into individual pieces. It's about how those pieces fit together." For the first time in the hour-long exchange, Musk felt like he had a breakthrough. He erased a few lines, restructured parts of the equation, and stepped back. The crowd, sensing the tension lift, leaned in. The equation still looked intimidating, but Musk was no longer working alone. Ben was at his side, guiding him in a way that only a prodigy could. Minutes passed as Musk took Ben's advice to heart, rearranging the components of the equation into something that finally clicked. And then there it was, a pattern, hidden in plain sight. "I've got it," Musk said, standing straight, a grin spreading across his face. "I can see it now. It's not just a problem. It's a relationship. The numbers are interacting in a way that I didn't expect." "You were right, Ben." The room exploded in applause, but this time, it was not just because of the brilliance of the equation, but because of the way both Musk and Ben had approached it. Through a shared sense of curiosity, a drive to understand, and a willingness to learn from each other. Musk turned to Ben, his expression one of respect. "I've spent my life solving problems, but this was different. You've just shown me a whole new way to look at things." Ben smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I didn't do anything special. I just showed you the way I think about math. And you've just taught me more than I could ever have imagined," Musk replied, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "This is why people like you are going to change the world." The crowd erupted in cheers, not just for the answer Musk had found, but for the unique, unexpected collaboration between the billionaire entrepreneur and an 8-year-old math genius. As the applause died down, Musk looked at Ben one last time. "So, Ben, what's next? What do you want to solve next?" Ben looked up at him with a mischievous grin. "Well, Mr. Musk," he said, his voice filled with that familiar spark, "I was thinking of solving the energy crisis. But maybe that's a bit much for today." Musk chuckled. "We'll see, kid. We'll see." The energy in the room was palpable as Elon Musk and Ben exchanged looks of mutual respect. The applause that had erupted when Musk solved the problem had barely died down, But it was clear that the true moment of the day wasn't just the equation. It was the connection between the two minds. The billionaire had come to the summit expecting to showcase his knowledge, but he left with something even more valuable: the understanding that innovation wasn't just about solving problems. It was about seeing the world in new ways. And in that moment, he had witnessed a new perspective, one that had been hidden behind the eyes of an 8-year-old. Ben, for his part, had never been interested in the spotlight. His purpose was always simple: to learn and to share knowledge with others. To him, mathematics wasn't a competition. It was a universal language that could explain the mysteries of the universe. But now, standing next to Musk, with the whole world watching, he felt a spark inside. A sense that maybe, just maybe, his own mission could be much bigger than he had imagined. Musk wiped his hands on his pants, still buzzing with the aftershock of the challenge. He turned toward the audience, who were now hanging on his every word, eager to hear what he would say next. "You know, I thought I was coming here to teach, to show off my latest project, my latest venture," Musk began, his voice steady. "But today, I learned something incredible. I learned that sometimes the best solutions don't come from years of experience, but from seeing things through fresh eyes." He paused, his gaze drifting over to Ben, who was standing off to the side, watching with an expression of quiet contentment. "Ben has just reminded me of something very important. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being open to new ideas and being willing to learn from anyone, no matter their age, background, or experience. We should all strive to be like Ben." Ben's face flushed slightly, but he didn't say anything. He was used to being the youngest person in the room, but this moment was different. The recognition felt strange, but in a good way. For so long, he had felt like an outsider in the world of academia, a kid who was too young to be taken seriously. But now, for the first time, he felt like he truly belonged. The problem-solving wasn't just about math. It was about finding people who understood him, who valued his ideas. As Musk continued speaking to the audience, Ben's thoughts drifted. He couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to collaborate with Musk on something bigger, something that could change the world. Musk's work on sustainable energy, space exploration, and AI had always fascinated Ben, and the idea of joining forces with someone like him seemed almost impossible. But then, something inside him clicked. Why not? Ben had always believed in the power of collaboration. If he could teach Musk something, what could they accomplish together? The possibilities were endless. As the ideas began to form in his mind, he turned to his parents, who were sitting at the back of the room. They had always encouraged him to think big, to push boundaries, and to never let age or circumstance hold him back. After Musk finished his speech and the audience began to disperse, Ben walked up to him, his heart pounding in his chest. The whole world seemed to fall away as he approached the tech mogul. "Mr. Musk?" Ben asked, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Musk turned toward him with a smile. "Hey there, Ben. You did great today. You've got a real gift." Ben smiled shyly. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. But I've been thinking. I know we were just solving math problems, but what if we worked together on something bigger? Something that could change the world?" Musk's smile widened, and for a moment, he simply looked at Ben as if sizing him up. "You're asking to collaborate with me, an 8-year-old?" he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Ben nodded. "Yes, you work on some incredible projects, and I know that math and science can help solve a lot of the world's problems. I'm not just talking about equations, I'm talking about real-world issues. Energy, space exploration, AI. I think we could make a difference together." Musk was silent for a moment, his mind processing Ben's words. The idea was audacious, but Musk had always been drawn to audacious ideas. He had spent his career tackling problems that no one else believed were solvable. So why not this? Why not collaborate with someone who saw the world in a way that Musk hadn't considered? "You know, Ben," Musk said slowly, "you've got the kind of thinking that I admire. You're not afraid to dream big. And frankly, that's the kind of mindset we need more of in this world." Ben's eyes lit up. "So, do you think we could work together?" Musk placed a hand on his chin, considering. "You know, it's funny. I've been looking for someone to help me solve the big problems, the ones that seem impossible. And you're already thinking about them." Maybe we don't need to wait until you're older. Ben's heart skipped a beat. You're serious? Musk chuckled. You better believe it. If you can keep up with me, I think we can do some really amazing things together. But we'll need to start thinking about the future, the kind of future where we don't just rely on technology to solve problems, but where we use technology to make sure the problems never happen in the first place. Ben nodded eagerly. I'm ready. Let's make the world better. The two of them stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling in. It was an unexpected partnership, one that defied expectations, but in a way, it felt perfect. They both had a vision for the future, a future where technology was not just an advancement, but a means to improve the world. And now, they were going to tackle it together. Musk extended his hand, his grin widening. All right, Ben. Let's make history. Ben shook his hand firmly. Deal. As the two of them walked off the stage together, the crowd erupted in applause once again. This wasn't just a moment about solving equations. This was the beginning of something bigger, and the world was about to find out just how big it could be. The moment the applause died down, Elon Musk and Ben stepped off the stage, their minds buzzing with possibility. What had started as a casual math challenge had morphed into something much larger, a collaboration that could shape the future. For Musk, the idea of working with a prodigy like Ben was both exhilarating and daunting. For Ben, the partnership represented a dream come true, an opportunity to work with someone who shared his vision of using technology to change the world. The two of them walked down the corridor backstage, where a team of assistants and engineers were waiting. Musk's expression was pensive, but a spark of excitement gleamed in his eyes. Ben, ever the quiet observer, couldn't help but feel like he was walking in the footsteps of giants. Every step felt like a giant leap forward, not just for him, but for everything he had ever dreamed of. All right, Ben, Musk said, breaking the silence. You've got my attention. But let's be clear, this isn't just about math anymore. If we're going to change the world, we need a plan. A big one. Ben nodded. I've been thinking about that. We're both working on some big things in our own fields. You're building rockets and working on energy solutions. I think we could combine those two areas, space exploration and sustainable energy, into something that could revolutionize not just how we live on Earth, but how we live in space. Musk's eyebrows raised. He had always believed that space exploration and sustainability were linked, but hearing it from a kid who had just blown him away with his understanding of numbers made him wonder if there was something more to the idea than he had previously considered. You're saying we could create a new kind of energy system, Musk said, one that powers both Earth and the missions we send into space? Exactly, Ben replied, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. You've already proven that we can make clean energy work here on Earth with Tesla. But what about on Mars? What about long-term sustainability in space? Musk paused, his mind racing. He had been thinking about Mars for years, but the challenge of sustaining life there was immense. Powering a colony on Mars, where resources were scarce, would require a completely different kind of energy system, one that could be produced on-site and wouldn't rely on Earth. What are you thinking, Ben? Musk asked, his voice almost a whisper. How can we make that a reality? Ben grinned. Solar energy. We've seen how it works here, but on Mars, it's even more important. There's enough sunlight to power a small city if we harness it correctly. And if we could build solar collectors that are more efficient, solar panels that are designed specifically for the Martian environment, we could make energy completely self-sustaining. Musk was taken aback. He had always known that solar power was the key to both Earth and space sustainability, but hearing Ben speak about it with such clarity and focus made him realize that there were angles he hadn't even considered yet. You're talking about solar arrays on Mars? Musk asked, his mind now racing ahead. But not just any solar arrays, ones that are optimized for the Martian atmosphere and climate. Ben nodded. Yes, and we could take it a step further. We could create a closed-loop system where energy from the solar arrays powers not just the colony's systems, but also the process of extracting resources from the Martian soil. That way, we're not just sustaining life. We're building the infrastructure for humanity to thrive on Mars. Musk smiled, the ideas swirling in his mind like a storm. This was exactly the kind of thinking he had been waiting for. A bold, forward-thinking solution that went beyond what was already possible. He had always believed that space exploration wasn't just about reaching other planets. It was about creating the systems that would allow humans to live there permanently. "This is the kind of thinking that changes everything," Musk said, his voice filled with awe. "If we can make this work, we won't just be sending humans to Mars. We'll be creating a sustainable future for humanity, not just here on Earth, but out there in the stars." Ben's face lit up. "I think we can do it, Mr. Musk. If we combine Tesla's energy expertise with SpaceX's engineering capabilities, we could design a system that allows us to grow beyond Earth. And it starts with the energy we use." Musk couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. For so long, he had dreamed of building a future on Mars, but the idea of doing it sustainably, using technologies that didn't rely on Earth, was a whole new frontier. "All right, Ben. Let's make it happen," Musk said, shaking his hand firmly. "We're not just going to send people to Mars. We're going to make it a place where humanity can thrive, and it all starts with this energy system." The two of them stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling in. This wasn't just a theoretical idea anymore. It was a mission, and together, they were going to make it a reality. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Ben and Musk's collaboration moved at a rapid pace, with the two of them diving headfirst into every aspect of the project. Musk brought in his top engineers from SpaceX and Tesla, while Ben contributed his genius-level understanding of energy systems, physics, and mathematical models. The synergy between them was undeniable, as Musk's creative vision combined with Ben's intellectual brilliance to create something truly revolutionary. The first step was to develop a series of prototypes for solar panels designed specifically for the Martian atmosphere. The thin atmosphere on Mars meant that solar arrays had to be far more efficient than anything Earth had produced. They also needed to withstand extreme temperatures and radiation. Ben and Musk's team worked tirelessly to perfect the designs, with Ben coming up with innovative solutions for how the solar panels could be deployed on Mars and how they could extract power even in the planet's most challenging environments. But energy was only part of the puzzle. They also needed a way to store and use that energy efficiently. And so, they began developing a new kind of energy storage system, one that could be compact and long-lasting, capable of running Mars-based colonies for decades without needing to be replaced. The team also worked on energy systems that could power everything from habitats to agricultural systems, ensuring that every aspect of life on Mars would be self-sustaining. As the weeks went by, Ben's presence became more integral to the team. He would work alongside Musk's engineers, guiding them through complex mathematical models and helping them identify potential flaws in their designs. The engineers were blown away by Ben's maturity and the depth of his knowledge. It was clear that the young prodigy was no ordinary child. He was a visionary, capable of seeing the future in ways that few could. But it wasn't just about the technology. Musk and Ben also had to navigate the logistics of such an ambitious project. They needed funding, support from governments, and a long-term plan to build the infrastructure on Mars. As the plans took shape, Musk's excitement grew. They were no longer just dreaming of a future on Mars. They were building it, step by step. What do you think of Ben's idea for sustainable energy on Mars? Could solar power really be the key to humanity's future on other planets? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The first signs of something extraordinary were beginning to emerge from the partnership between Elon Musk and Ben. The quiet revolution that had started with a simple math challenge was now unfolding into something much larger. What had begun as an abstract conversation about energy on Mars was transforming into a groundbreaking project that would reshape the future of space exploration and sustainability. Musk, always the visionary, was driven by an insatiable desire to make humanity a multiplanetary species, and Ben's radical ideas were the perfect spark to fuel that ambition. But despite their optimism, the path ahead was filled with challenges. Bringing a sustainable energy system to Mars was no small feat. It wasn't just about innovation or engineering. It was about overcoming the many unknowns of the Martian environment, which was vastly different from anything on Earth. The team worked day and night, drafting blueprints for the new solar arrays, perfecting the energy storage systems, and designing the infrastructure that would be needed to turn the barren Martian landscape into a thriving colony. Ben, who had already been solving complex mathematical problems since he was 6, was now applying his sharp mind to these practical, real-world issues. While Musk and his team of engineers focused on the technical aspects, Ben often came up with unorthodox solutions, asking questions that no one had even thought to ask. One afternoon, as they sat around a large conference table in SpaceX's headquarters, Ben spoke up, his voice calm but purposeful. "I've been thinking about how we're going to store energy on Mars. The solar panels will be great for generating power, but we also need to account for the fact that Mars experiences dust storms, and the days are much longer than Earth's. If we don't find a way to store energy for those long nights or during storms, we'll run into problems." Musk looked up, his eyebrows furrowed. "Good point. We've been focusing on the solar arrays, but we need something more robust. What do you suggest?" Ben didn't hesitate. "What if we use a combination of solar energy and thermal storage? We could develop a system that converts excess solar energy into heat during the day and stores it in insulated tanks. At night or during storms, we could use that stored heat to produce electricity." Musk leaned forward, his eyes lighting up. "You're saying we could store thermal energy and convert it back to power when needed?" "Exactly," Ben replied. "And with the right materials, we could keep the system compact enough to be practical for a Mars habitat. I've been looking into the idea of using phase change materials, substances that can store large amounts of energy when they change states, like from solid to liquid or vice versa." Musk was quiet for a moment, mulling over the idea. Phase change materials. That's interesting. You're right, thermal energy storage could solve the problem of nighttime power. And it could be a much more reliable option in the event of a dust storm. Ben smiled. "Exactly. It's all about efficiency, and these materials could store enough energy to power key systems, life support, habitat heating, even agriculture, through those long Martian nights." The engineers in the room exchanged looks, impressed by Ben's insight. The plan was ambitious, but the more they thought about it, the more they realized it could work. Musk was already imagining the possibilities. If they could make this work on Mars, it would change everything, not just for space exploration, but for sustainable energy back here on Earth. "Well, it looks like we've got ourselves a new challenge," Musk said with a grin. "Let's start testing phase change materials. If this works, it might be the key to making Mars a self-sustaining home for humanity." Ben's mind was already racing ahead. While the team got to work on the technical aspects, Ben began drafting mathematical models that could simulate how different materials would behave in the harsh Martian environment. He also worked on models for how much power the systems would need, taking into account the unpredictable nature of Mars's weather, the variable sunlight, and the energy requirements for a full Mars colony. As the weeks went on, the project picked up momentum. Tesla's engineers, led by Ben's own guidance on the thermal storage system, began testing prototypes of the phase change material, while SpaceX's team worked on integrating the solar arrays with Mars-based technology. Musk, as always, was focused on the big picture, but Ben's influence was becoming increasingly clear. His ability to think critically and ask the right questions was pushing the project to new heights. After months of hard work, the team had finally developed the first prototype of the solar thermal energy system. It was a small-scale model, but the results were promising. The solar arrays were designed to be lightweight and adaptable to Mars's thin atmosphere, while the thermal storage system could hold enough energy to power critical systems during the Martian night. Ben and Musk stood side by side in the testing facility at SpaceX's headquarters, watching as engineers fired up the first test. A few minutes into the experiment, the solar arrays began absorbing energy from artificial light, mimicking the Martian sun. The phase change material, housed in insulated containers, started to heat up, absorbing energy as it transitioned from solid to liquid. "Here we go," Musk muttered, his eyes glued to the monitors as the system came online. Ben stood quietly, his arms crossed, watching the data flow in. It was only a matter of time before they would know whether the system was working as expected. The room was filled with the hum of computers and the sound of engineers calling out measurements, but Ben remained focused. He had complete faith in the model. After all, it was his design. He had tested it in simulations, refined it, and accounted for every variable. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the system switched over from thermal storage to electrical output. The room erupted in cheers as the first test was declared a success. The solar thermal system was working exactly as planned. The phase change material had stored the energy and was now releasing it back into the system, powering the mock habitat in front of them. "We did it," Musk said, turning to Ben with a wide grin. "This is going to work, and it's going to change everything." Ben smiled, though he remained calm. "This is just the beginning. We still need to scale it up, but it's a step in the right direction." Musk looked at Ben, his expression one of deep admiration. "You know, I've worked with some of the best minds in the world, but I have to say, you're one of the brightest I've ever met." Ben shrugged modestly. "I just know how to look at problems in a different way. It's all about the details." "Don't sell yourself short, Ben. You've just helped us take a huge leap forward in making life on Mars a reality. This is going to be the future of space exploration and maybe even energy on Earth." As the team celebrated, Ben's mind was already racing ahead, thinking about the next challenge, building a scalable version of the system for Mars. And he wasn't done yet. There was still so much to do, so many possibilities to explore. The success of the solar thermal energy prototype was only the beginning. With the first test completed, the team's focus shifted to scaling up the technology for Mars. The pressure was mounting. What they had achieved so far was groundbreaking, but the real challenge lay in making this system large enough to support a self-sustaining colony on Mars, an endeavor that would require not only brilliant minds but also immense resources, time, and sheer willpower. Ben and Musk knew that their work was far from over. Mars was a harsh, unforgiving place. It wasn't just about energy. It was about creating a whole ecosystem where humans could live, work, and thrive for extended periods. Ben wasn't. Musk nodded thoughtfully. "That's a smart move. If we're going to make this system work long-term, we need to prepare for every possible contingency." Ben and Musk began brainstorming ideas, looking at alternative energy sources that could complement the solar thermal system. Musk was keen on the idea of wind energy, given that Mars had frequent dust storms and wind speeds that, while not as powerful as on Earth, were still significant. They realized that if they could develop a lightweight, durable wind turbine that could operate on Mars, they would have another layer of backup power. "It's all about layering our approach," Musk said. "Solar will give us the bulk of the energy, but wind could help during dust storms, and we'll have the thermal storage to carry us through the Martian nights. If we make this work, we won't just be able to survive on Mars, we'll be able to thrive." Ben's excitement grew as he saw the pieces of the puzzle coming together. They were no longer just talking about powering a single habitat. They were building the framework for an entire ecosystem capable of sustaining life on another planet. As Musk and Ben refined their energy systems, they realized that it wasn't just about the technology, it was about the people. Mars wasn't just a place to visit. It was a place to live, to build, to grow. The colony would need a supply of food, water, and breathable air. Without these, no amount of technology could ensure humanity's survival. Musk began looking at ways to create a closed-loop life support system, one that would recycle water and air, provide sustainable food production, and create a safe, habitable environment in which people could live for years without needing to rely on Earth. It was a daunting task, but Musk was used to pushing boundaries. Still, he knew that even with all the right technology, the biggest challenge would be how to transport everything to Mars and establish a permanent base. And that's when a new idea emerged. A concept that would change the way they thought about the entire project. What if we didn't just build habitats on Mars? Musk asked one evening in a meeting with Ben and the engineers. What if we started by creating a self-sustaining farm? A place where we can grow food, recycle water, and produce the oxygen we need for the colony. Ben's eyes widened. "You mean, like a biodome?" "Not just a dome," Musk said with a grin. "What if we could build a whole biosphere? A fully autonomous system that would mimic Earth's ecosystems? If we can make that work, we'll be able to grow our own food, purify our own water, and produce oxygen, all without needing to rely on Earth for supplies." Ben was already processing the idea. "We need a system that can maintain balance. Plants produce oxygen, and we breathe in oxygen. We produce CO2, and plants need CO2 to grow. If we can establish this cycle and use our energy systems to power the biosphere, it could be self-sustaining." Musk's grin widened. "Exactly. And if we can perfect this biosphere, we'll have a model for Mars colonization that doesn't just focus on survival, it focuses on thriving. A place where people can live and build a community, just like on Earth. The next few months were spent designing the biosphere, a structure that would incorporate the best of Earth's agricultural and environmental technologies. They worked on creating hydroponic farms, systems to purify water, and artificial biospheres where plants could grow under controlled conditions. The goal was to develop a place on Mars where humans could live sustainably, growing their own food and recycling their resources without the need for constant resupply from Earth. The biosphere was more than just a solution to the colony's needs. It was a symbol of what was possible when technology, innovation, and human ingenuity came together. Musk and Ben knew that this was the future of space exploration. And they weren't just building it for themselves, they were building it for future generations. With every breakthrough, every piece of the puzzle that fell into place, Musk and Ben grew more determined. The dream of living on Mars wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was becoming a reality. And together, they were going to make it happen. As the biosphere prototype came closer to completion, the excitement within the team grew palpable. But as much as the team had made progress, reality began to set in. Mars was still an uncharted frontier, and no matter how advanced their technology became, no one could predict every challenge they would face. Elon Musk, ever the optimist, knew that this mission was going to take more than just brilliant ideas. It was going to take perseverance, creativity, and the courage to face the unknown. Ben, for all his mathematical genius and insight, was about to encounter the real weight of the mission. The pressure was mounting. There were moments when even he wondered if all of this could truly work. Mars was far from a safe, predictable place. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope. The team was stretched thin, but their resolve remained strong. It all started one late evening when Ben was in the lab, running simulations for the biosphere's energy and life support systems. He'd been working nonstop, trying to perfect the model for how the colony's water recycling system would work, when a sudden alert appeared on his screen. His pulse quickened as he read the message. Ben frowned and quickly began running the model again, but the error remained. He glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. The fatigue from days of continuous work was starting to catch up with him, but he couldn't let it go. This was too important. After all, the whole premise of the Mars colony depended on the precise balance of energy production, storage, and consumption. If the energy model was off, nothing else would work. He spent hours trying to isolate the issue. The energy systems, solar arrays, thermal storage, wind turbines, had all been tested and calibrated meticulously. Everything seemed fine, but the model was still flagging problems. Ben's mind raced through every possible cause, but the answer remained elusive. By morning, Ben was still at the computer, exhausted and frustrated. His eyes were blurry from lack of sleep, but his determination was stronger than ever. He knew there had to be a simple explanation. He just hadn't found it yet. Finally, after another round of checks, he discovered the flaw. The thermal storage system, designed to handle large fluctuations in energy demand, was failing to adjust to the nighttime temperature drop on Mars. The model didn't account for the sheer magnitude of energy that would be required to stabilize the system during those extreme temperature shifts. This oversight was a critical one. If they didn't fix it, the entire life support system could collapse during the cold Martian nights. Ben immediately drafted a report and sent it to Elon. He was aware of how big this setback was, but he wasn't about to sugarcoat it. Within moments, Musk was on the phone with Ben. "I got your message," Musk said, his voice a mix of concern and curiosity. "What's going on?" Ben quickly explained the issue with the thermal storage system. The model is failing to predict the amount of energy needed during the cold Martian nights. The system won't be able to maintain the temperature in the biosphere long enough, and that could lead to a failure of the entire life support system. Musk paused. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Ben wasn't sure if Musk was disappointed, or if he was just thinking through the situation. "I see. It's a critical issue, but I'm not ready to throw in the towel just yet. We've overcome challenges before. We need to figure this out." Ben's shoulders sagged slightly. He'd known Musk would be pragmatic about it, but the weight of the failure was still heavy on him. "I think I found the solution. We need to add a backup power source to stabilize the system. Something reliable for those extreme drops in temperature. A more energy-dense material, like graphene batteries, could handle the load." Musk was silent for a moment. Graphene? That's ambitious, Ben. But if you think it can work, I'll support you. Let's run the tests. Ben took a deep breath. He knew that the new solution would require additional resources and time, more than anyone had anticipated. But Musk was right. They had no choice but to push forward. The stakes were too high. Over the next few days, Ben worked tirelessly to integrate graphene-based batteries into the biosphere's energy grid. Graphene, a cutting-edge material, had a high energy density and could store much more energy than traditional batteries. If it worked, it could be the game-changer they needed. The tests were rigorous. Ben and the engineers worked day and night, fine-tuning the energy balance, testing the material, and ensuring that the system could handle the load during Mars's frigid nights. There were moments of frustration, but with every obstacle, they inched closer to a solution. Musk, though distant at times, remained a constant presence, offering encouragement when it was needed most. It wasn't just about solving a technical issue. It was about proving to themselves that they could adapt, that they could find solutions to the impossible. One evening, after what felt like weeks of sleepless nights, Ben ran the final simulation. He pressed the Enter key and held his breath as the numbers began to flow on the screen. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The screen remained frozen. Then, finally, the results began to populate. The energy system held up, even under the worst conditions. Ben let out a relieved sigh. It worked. They had done it. The graphene-based battery had successfully stabilized the thermal system, providing enough power to keep the biosphere functioning through the Martian night. The breakthrough was celebrated, but Musk's focus remained as sharp as ever. The colony was still a long way from reality. They were no longer just trying to solve technical problems. They were embarking on a journey that would change humanity forever. Mars was no longer an abstract dream. It was becoming tangible. Ben had grown accustomed to the long days and nights of work, but now he realized how far they'd come. There were still so many unknowns, but this challenge had become more than just a mission to Mars. It was a vision that Musk had crafted and driven toward for years. And with Ben's unwavering creativity and passion, that vision was becoming a reality. In a quiet moment, as they both stood before the large screen showing the biosphere's success, Musk turned to Ben. "You know, when I first started talking about Mars, people thought I was crazy," Musk said, his voice quieter than usual. "But now, I think we're getting closer. And I couldn't have done it without you, Ben." Ben smiled, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. "It's been a team effort, and I'm glad to be part of it." The success of the Biosphere prototype and the breakthrough with graphene-based batteries marked a pivotal moment in the Mars project. But even with these major victories, there was still one question that lingered heavily in Elon Musk's mind. How soon could they actually send humans to Mars? Elon had always been clear about his vision. Humans had to become a multi-planetary species. But as the project neared a critical phase, he realized that the timeline for reaching Mars was more than just a matter of building technology. It was a matter of human readiness, logistics, and resources. More than anything, it was a test of his own ability to navigate the colossal scale of this mission. One thing was certain: Musk could not do it alone. After a period of focused work on the solar thermal arrays and the biosphere, Musk called for a special meeting. The room was filled with the core team of engineers, scientists, and project leaders who had been working on the Mars mission for months, if not years. The air was thick with anticipation as Musk addressed the room. "We've made incredible progress," Musk began, his voice steady. "The biosphere is functional. The energy systems are working. We have the technology we need to survive on Mars. But now, we need to take the next step. We're talking about sending people to Mars. We're talking about a permanent colony." A hush fell over the room. Everyone knew what was at stake. It wasn't just about sending a few astronauts to Mars. It was about creating a thriving, self-sustaining colony that could survive independently from Earth. Elon continued, "But I need to be sure that we're ready. We need to test this entire system on Earth before we even think about sending it to Mars. So, I've made a decision. We're going to set up a test colony, a full-scale simulation of life on Mars, right here on Earth." The room erupted into murmurs, a mix of excitement and nervous energy. They'd all heard of similar experiments, analog missions on Earth where teams lived in isolation to simulate life on Mars. But Musk wasn't talking about just another isolated experiment. He was talking about a real, self-sustaining colony, complete with a biosphere, solar thermal energy, water recycling systems, and everything that the Mars colony would need to survive. Ben leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Elon, how are we going to simulate the gravity, the atmosphere, and the long-term isolation? It's not just about technology, it's about replicating the environment. Musk nodded. I know, Ben. That's why we're going to partner with the best in the field. We'll build a simulated Martian environment using inflatable habitats. We'll isolate the participants for at least 2 years to simulate the time it would take to travel to and from Mars. And we'll test everything, from the technology to human psychology. We need to learn everything we can before we make the leap to Mars. As the weeks passed, the logistics of the test colony began to take shape. The first hurdle was finding a location. After extensive planning, Musk's team decided on a remote site in the Nevada desert, far enough from civilization to simulate the isolation of Mars, but accessible enough to provide necessary supplies. It was the perfect place to build a mock-up of the Martian surface, complete with habitable modules, solar arrays, and life support systems. The test colony would consist of a small team of astronauts, engineers, and scientists who would live in this environment for 24 months. They would be cut off from direct contact with the outside world, just as they would be on Mars. The goal was not just to test the technology, but to learn how humans would cope in such an extreme environment. For Ben, this was the culmination of everything they had been working toward. He designed the energy systems that would power the colony, and he had been integral in developing the biosphere. But now, he had a new challenge. He would need to manage the systems firsthand in a real-world, albeit simulated, environment. And the stakes couldn't be higher. The next challenge for Musk was assembling the team for the test colony. The selection process was intense. They needed people who were not only technically skilled but also mentally tough enough to handle the isolation, extreme conditions, and the unknowns of living in a simulated Martian environment. Musk wanted to make sure that the team wasn't just a group of brilliant minds. They had to be resilient, adaptable, and capable of working together under pressure. Ben was watching this process closely, knowing that the individuals chosen for the mission would become part of the team that would one day help establish a permanent human presence on Mars. In some ways, this selection was just as important as the technology they were developing. The right mix of personalities, skills, and endurance could make or break the project. After extensive interviews and simulations, Musk announced the team. There were 6 crew members, including 2 engineers, a scientist, an experienced astronaut, a doctor, and a psychologist who would monitor the team's mental health throughout the mission. The final member of the team, much to Ben's surprise, was none other than Dr. Emily Grant, a renowned geologist and ex-NASA astronaut who had been one of the original candidates for the Mars mission. Her expertise in planetary geology would be invaluable, especially for future missions to Mars. Ben had met Dr. Grant a few times before, and he knew that she had the mental toughness to handle anything Mars could throw at her. But he also knew that she wasn't just there to play a role. She was a pioneer, a trailblazer in the truest sense. "I've heard a lot about you, Ben," Dr. Grant said, as she shook his hand. "I think we're going to make a great team on this." Ben smiled. "I think so too. This is going to be the adventure of a lifetime." The day before the team was to begin their 2-year test mission, the sense of anticipation was palpable. The test colony had been constructed, and the crew was ready to be sealed inside. Everything was in place: solar arrays, biospheres, food supplies, water recycling systems. But the reality of the mission was now settling in. Ben and Elon stood on a hill overlooking the complex, the bright desert sun casting long shadows behind them. It was a beautiful, desolate scene, a landscape that could easily be mistaken for the surface of Mars. "This is it," Elon said quietly, almost to himself. "We've done everything we can. Tomorrow, they go in." Ben looked at the compound in the distance. "How are you feeling about it?" Elon's gaze remained fixed on the colony. Excited, nervous, but mostly ready. "The test will tell us what we still need to fix. We've prepared for everything, but we don't really know what will happen once we're inside." Ben nodded. He understood. The technology was there, but the human aspect of the mission, how the crew would handle isolation, how the systems would perform under real-world pressure, was still unknown. What would you find most challenging about living in a simulated Mars colony? The isolation? The technology? The unknowns? Share your thoughts below. Could you survive 2 years in such an environment? The next day, the team assembled at the entrance of the test colony. The compound, nestled in the Nevada desert, stood as a testament to their years of work, an isolated outpost designed to simulate life on Mars. To an outsider, it might have looked like a space station more than a colony. Sealed habitats, solar panels stretching toward the sky, and communication dishes sending signals to Earth. But to the crew, it was much more than that. It was a life-or-death experiment. Elon Musk and Ben stood with the rest of the team, watching as the 6 crew members slowly donned their spacesuits. One by one, they entered the habitat module, sealed behind a thick, reinforced airlock. As the final hatch closed with a sharp hiss, the atmosphere inside felt a little too real. This was it. The test had begun. Inside the colony, the first few days were filled with excitement and uncertainty. The crew members, though well-prepared, were feeling the weight of the experiment. Every action, every decision, mattered. The artificial atmosphere, the recycled water, and the simulated gravity were all designed to mimic what they would experience on Mars. For all their preparation, there was no way to truly know how they would adapt. Ben and Elon observed the colony's systems remotely from their monitoring station. It was their job to ensure that the technologies they designed were functioning smoothly, but there was something uniquely human about the mission now. The crew wasn't just working with machinery, they were living within it, relying on it for their survival. Every minute they spent in the habitat brought them closer to understanding the challenges of life on Mars. Ben's focus was primarily on the energy systems. The graphene-based batteries were performing well, keeping the colony's power supply stable, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something might go wrong. He was constantly reviewing the data, cross-checking the status of the biosphere, the solar arrays, and the water recycling system. Even the smallest malfunction could result in disaster. On the 5th day of the mission, the first true test came. The oxygen levels in the habitat started to drop. It was a minor fluctuation, but when you're living in a closed environment where every breath counts, even the smallest change can send ripples of panic. Ben immediately noticed the issue on his monitoring screen. "Oxygen levels are dropping at an unusual rate," he said, voice tense. "We need to investigate." Within minutes, the team inside the habitat was alerted. Dr. Emily Grant, the experienced astronaut and geologist, immediately began troubleshooting the issue with the life support systems. She quickly realized that the issue was tied to the CO2 scrubber, which had malfunctioned. The scrubber was responsible for removing carbon dioxide from the air, but it was no longer functioning properly. "Ben, it's the scrubber." Emily's voice crackled over the comms. "We're running out of time. I can feel the air getting heavier. We need to fix it fast." Ben's heart raced. This wasn't just a technical glitch. It was life or death. The team couldn't survive long without a functional CO2 scrubber, especially in an enclosed environment. "Try bypassing the system and switching to manual," Ben suggested, quickly running through his mental checklist. "I'll send over the backup procedures." "You have to act fast, Emily." Ben's mind raced as he simultaneously coordinated with Elon, who had already contacted the Earth-based support team for any additional help. "Ben, we've got to solve this on our own. No one is going to get there in time," Musk said, his voice firm but strained. As the crew worked under pressure to fix the scrubber, the tension inside the habitat grew. They were running out of time. Without a functional CO2 scrubber, the oxygen levels would soon become too dangerous to breathe. Ben felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him, his eyes glued to the real-time data streaming in from the habitat. The temperature in the biosphere was stable, the water recycling system was functioning, but if the air went bad, it could mean the end of the mission. Hours ticked by. Sweat beaded on Ben's forehead as he watched the oxygen levels fluctuate. The crew had gone into emergency mode, but it wasn't enough. The problem with the scrubber was more severe than they had initially anticipated. "How are we doing?" Elon asked, his voice sharp. Ben exhaled deeply. "It's going to be tight. If Emily can't fix the scrubber soon, we'll have to go into emergency shutdown mode. But that would mean losing critical systems." Suddenly, the comms crackled again. "We've done it." Emily's voice echoed in the speakers, relief pouring through her words. The manual override worked. The scrubber is back online. We're safe. Ben let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Great job, Emily. You saved us. That night, as the adrenaline from the crisis began to wear off, the team gathered in the common room of the habitat. It was a small, cozy space, a stark contrast to the isolation they were feeling. There were no windows, just the steady hum of life support systems and the occasional sound of someone adjusting their equipment. They were cut off from Earth, with nothing but the walls of the habitat and each other for company. Ben, who had been overseeing the entire operation, sat at the table with the rest of the crew. Dr. Grant, despite the stress of the day, had a smile on her face. You did great today, Ben said to her. I don't think we would have made it without you. Emily laughed lightly, her eyes tired but bright. We're all in this together. But it's not over yet. We still have a long road ahead of us. Ben nodded. You're right. This was just the beginning. Musk's voice came through the comms again. I'm proud of what you've accomplished today. You handled the situation like true pioneers. But remember, every problem we solve here is one we won't have to deal with on Mars. There are going to be more challenges, bigger ones, but we'll face them together. As the days passed, the crew adjusted to their new environment. The initial crisis had been a wake-up call, but now there was a renewed sense of purpose. The team knew that each test, each small victory, brought them closer to their goal. They were not just testing technology, they were testing their ability to survive, adapt, and overcome. For Ben, it was a reminder of why he had dedicated himself to this mission. The technology they had built, the systems they had designed, were all pieces of a much larger puzzle. But it wasn't just about making sure the machines worked, it was about the people. The Mars mission was about human potential. And no matter how many setbacks they encountered, the mission would continue. They would survive. They would adapt. And they would make history. Days turned into weeks inside the test colony, and the crew had managed to stabilize the initial technical issues. They were settling into a routine of sorts, with each crew member focused on their specific tasks. The environment, though challenging, was manageable, and the team was beginning to see just how important human resilience would be in the harsh conditions of Mars. But despite the technical successes, the real challenge was something no one had fully prepared for: the human factor. As the days wore on, small tensions began to rise. The isolation was intense. There were no distractions, no changes in scenery, no outside world to provide a sense of relief. The team was living in a pressure cooker, and the weight of confinement started to take its toll. One evening, after a routine systems check, Dr. Emily Grant entered the common area, looking weary. Her face was taut with stress. Ben, we've got a problem, she said, her voice clipped. Ben, who had been reviewing data on the energy systems, looked up. What's wrong? It's the crew, Emily said, shaking her head. We've been here for weeks, and I'm starting to notice subtle signs of tension between the members. People are getting irritable. I think the isolation is beginning to get to them. Ben took a deep breath. I was afraid of this. We're not just testing technology. We're testing human endurance, too. I don't think it's just about the isolation, Emily continued, her voice lowering. There's more at play. People are starting to question their roles. Some are second-guessing the decisions made by others. We're all feeling the strain of constant pressure and minimal downtime. Ben could hear the worry in her voice. He knew Emily was someone who could withstand pressure. She had done it during her NASA missions. But even she was starting to feel the weight. We need to address this before it gets worse, Ben said firmly. We can't afford to have internal conflict now. We need to stay focused. Emily nodded. I'll talk to the crew, but I'm not sure if it's enough. We might need external support to help with the mental health side of things. Ben agreed. He quickly relayed the issue to Elon Musk. Elon listened carefully to Ben's report and then responded with his usual calm, though there was a hint of concern in his voice. Ben, I think you're right. We knew this was going to be a human challenge as much as a technological one. I'll arrange for a psychologist to assist remotely. They can help the crew with strategies to cope with the isolation. But you're right. We need to address this as soon as possible. The stress could affect everything. Ben felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had worried that Elon would underestimate the psychological aspects of the mission, But Musk was quick to take action. The addition of remote psychological support would hopefully help the crew develop the coping strategies they needed to continue. As the weeks stretched on, the crew's psychological challenges deepened. The isolation began to manifest in various ways. Some crew members started becoming withdrawn, while others had trouble sleeping. The smallest issues, like a faulty piece of equipment or a miscommunication during a routine check, became sources of mounting frustration. The crew's emotional state began to affect the efficiency of the mission, and tensions rose during the daily briefings. At times, the tension would boil over. One afternoon, John, the engineer responsible for maintenance, lashed out at Michael, the doctor, over a minor mistake in the lab's waste disposal system. "I told you to check the filtration. Now we have a potential contamination risk, and you didn't double-check the procedure." John snapped, his face reddening with frustration. Michael, usually calm under pressure, responded sharply. "I did check it, John, but there's more going on here than just equipment issues. We've been stuck in this box for weeks. We're not built to live like this." Ben, who had been monitoring the incident from the control room, could feel his stomach tighten. He quickly activated the intercom to defuse the situation. "Everyone, listen up," Ben said, his voice calm but firm. "We're not going to get through this by turning on each other. The stress is real, but we have a job to do. We need to pull together, not apart. Let's take a break, step back, and then come back with a clearer head." It wasn't the first time Ben had intervened, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. The team was on edge. They had come this far, but they were starting to crack under the pressure. The remote psychologist arrived in the form of a series of virtual therapy sessions that were scheduled for the crew at regular intervals. They were short, focused sessions designed to provide coping strategies for stress, anxiety, and isolation. Dr. Sarah Liu, the psychologist, facilitated these sessions, using cognitive behavioral techniques to help the crew process their emotions and concerns. Over the next few days, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere inside the habitat. Crew members began to open up more about their fears, frustrations, and anxieties. During one of the sessions, Emily spoke up about her own struggles. "I've been on space missions before, but this is different," she said, her voice quiet. "On a real mission, there's a sense of purpose, of going somewhere. Here, we're just waiting. The monotony is draining." Dr. Liu's voice came through the comms. "That's a common feeling, Emily. In fact, it's something we often encounter in long-term isolation situations. The key is to break the monotony, to give yourself a reason to stay connected to the mission. Set small, achievable goals every day, and find ways to celebrate those victories, no matter how small they seem." The sessions were a turning point. The crew started using some of the tools Dr. Liu provided to address their emotional needs. They created small rituals to maintain a sense of normalcy, daily check-ins, communal meals, and brief moments of downtime where they could relax and reflect. Slowly, the mood began to shift, though it was clear the psychological toll of living in isolation was something that couldn't be easily fixed. After several weeks of tension, Musk made an unexpected decision. He decided to visit the colony in person to get a better sense of what the crew was going through. While the test colony was in a remote desert location, it was still technically accessible by a high-speed vehicle system, and Elon insisted that a personal visit would help him understand the full scope of the mission. Ben was skeptical at first. Bringing Elon to the colony could be disruptive, and the team was already under pressure. But when Elon arrived, his presence had a strange calming effect. The crew seemed to rally around him, eager to talk about their concerns and to show him the work they had been doing. In the meeting room, Musk sat down with the crew and listened intently as each member spoke about the challenges they were facing. "I know this isn't easy," Elon said, his voice softer than usual. "You're testing more than just technology here. You're testing what it means to be human in a place like Mars. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I know you can keep going. But if you need something, don't hesitate to reach out." It was in the following days, after Elon's visit, that the crew began to find their rhythm again. The pressure didn't magically vanish, but the sense of unity and resolve began to return. They had seen Elon, the person who had spearheaded the entire Mars mission, take time out of his schedule to show up. And in that moment, they realized something crucial. They were not alone in this mission. They were part of something much bigger. For Ben, This was a breakthrough moment. It wasn't just the technology, the design, or the systems that would make Mars possible. It was the human spirit. It was their ability to adapt, overcome, and grow in the face of unimaginable challenges. And he knew, deep down, that this was the key to succeeding on Mars. The colony, now fully operational, had settled into a routine. The crew members had found their rhythm, managing to balance the intense work of maintaining the habitat with the need to protect their mental well-being. They were starting to feel like pioneers, each contributing to the larger goal of making Mars a home for humanity. But despite the outward sense of stability, something was simmering beneath the surface. Something none of them could have predicted. One morning, the crew was alerted by an unanticipated signal coming through their communication systems. It wasn't the usual ping from Earth. This signal was different, strange, distorted, almost human. Ben's heart skipped a beat as he listened to the transmission. "Is anyone out there? Can you hear me?" The voice was weak, crackling through the static. It was unmistakably human, and yet, it wasn't supposed to be. They were the only ones in the colony, with no other humans anywhere near the vicinity. The transmission was coming from an unexpected source, just outside the colony's perimeter. Ben jumped into action, connecting to the signal's source. His mind raced. "Elon, we have a problem. There's a signal coming in, a human voice. It's coming from a location we don't have on record." Elon's response was swift and sharp. "What do you mean, a human voice? Are you sure? Is it a mistake?" "I'm sure," Ben said, eyes wide with disbelief. "It's coming from a spot beyond the safety boundary. It sounds like someone is out there, but it's not possible." Elon was silent for a moment. "I'll get a drone ready to investigate. Stand by." The crew watched nervously as Ben's team dispatched a drone to locate the source of the signal. The small, autonomous craft was equipped with infrared sensors and cameras that could map the terrain and track any unusual movements. As it approached the coordinates, the screen showed an unexpected sight, a figure standing motionless in the harsh desert sunlight. A person. Ben's heart raced. How was this possible? No one was supposed to be out there. The drone hovered closer, revealing the figure to be a man. He was gaunt, his spacesuit in tatters, and he looked disoriented, as though he had been wandering for days. The feed was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had somehow found their way to the test colony. The team quickly mobilized to bring the stranger into the safety of the habitat. Dr. Grant was the first to assess him. He was dehydrated, sunburned, and physically exhausted, but his vitals were stable, thankfully. Once inside, the man collapsed into a chair, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden influx of care. His name was Samuel Green, and his story was a chilling one. "I was part of a separate mission," he began, his voice hoarse. "A test group sent out on a recon mission for Mars colonization. We were supposed to be working with NASA on a long-term research station. Different from yours. Something went wrong. We lost communication. The systems failed. I don't know how I ended up here." The crew listened in stunned silence as Samuel recounted his harrowing journey. His group had been stranded on a secretive mission, one that had gone dark. His colleagues had disappeared, and he had spent the last few weeks wandering the desert, surviving off what little he had. His suit had failed, and his oxygen supply was dangerously low when he had finally stumbled upon the signal from the test colony. "So, you've been out here, all alone?" Emily asked, incredulous. "How long?" "I don't know. Weeks. Maybe months," Samuel replied, his eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. "I couldn't get in touch with anyone. The equipment, it's all dead. I'm the only one left." Ben's mind raced. This discovery changed everything. The Mars mission, which had been confined to a strict schedule, now had an unexpected complication. If Samuel's story was true, and he was indeed part of another program, this could mean one of two things. Either a catastrophic failure had occurred on another Mars-bound project, or there was a larger, more dangerous conspiracy at play. Elon Musk's voice crackled through the comms. "Ben, get to the bottom of this. Verify everything Samuel's telling you. We can't afford any surprises right now. You need to know how this happened and if it poses a risk to the mission." Ben nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. The sudden appearance of Samuel was far too convenient. He had to be cautious. Something felt off. There were too many unknowns about this other mission, and Ben wasn't willing to trust everything at face value. Over the next few days, the team focused on learning everything they could about Samuel and his mysterious mission. They scoured their communications database for any information on the operation he claimed to be part of, but there was no mention of it. No record. Nothing. It was as if the entire mission had been erased from history. When Ben asked Samuel for more details about the mission, the answers only raised more questions. We were studying the planet's geology, looking for signs of ancient life. Our station was supposed to be an independent experiment. No one was supposed to know we existed. But something went wrong fast. The communication system failed, and then everything else followed. Emily grew more skeptical. You're telling us you were part of a secret mission, but we've never heard of it? No records, no data, nothing? You're saying your entire crew was lost, and you somehow survived out here for weeks? Samuel's face twisted with emotion. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't even know if anyone would be out here. I didn't have a choice. The tension inside the habitat grew. The crew was torn. Was Samuel a victim of an unspeakable tragedy, or was there something more sinister at play? As days passed, the crew had to make a crucial decision. Samuel's presence presented both an opportunity and a threat. Could he be trusted? Should they try to integrate him into the mission, or would his presence jeopardize everything they had worked for? Ben and Elon conferred privately about the next steps. We can't just send him away, Elon said, his voice low. We need to find out the truth. But we have to be cautious. We can't let him put the entire mission at risk. Ben agreed. We'll keep him here for now, but I'm going to have the crew monitor his every move. We need to understand exactly what happened out there. If this is part of a larger failure, we need to prepare. As the team moved forward with their investigation, they had to confront a harsh reality. They were no longer just testing the viability of life on Mars. They were now embroiled in a much larger mystery, one that could determine the future of space exploration and the truth about what was really happening on Mars. The implications were far-reaching. There was no turning back now, and as the crew settled into their new reality with Samuel Green, they knew one thing for certain. The stakes had just become much higher. The presence of Samuel Green had thrown everything into disarray. The crew, who had been working hard to create a sustainable life on Mars, now found themselves tangled in a web of uncertainty and suspicion. Every conversation was tinged with doubt, and the atmosphere in the habitat had shifted from camaraderie to quiet tension. No one knew whether to trust Samuel or if his story was a carefully crafted lie. Ben was determined to get to the bottom of this. Samuel's story didn't add up. A secret Mars mission, no records, and a missing crew? It was almost too convenient. If this was some kind of elaborate test or an elaborate cover-up, they needed to know. They couldn't afford to be blindsided. Over the next few days, Ben worked tirelessly to dig into the mystery. He combed through all the files they had from Earth, hoping to find even a trace of Samuel's mission. But each search came up empty. There were no records of any independent Mars missions, no documentation on a lost crew, no data on a failed operation in the region where Samuel claimed to have been. It was as if the entire mission had been wiped off the map. Frustrated, Ben turned to Elon for guidance. The idea of a covert operation on Mars was unsettling, and Ben needed answers. Elon, Ben said one evening over a secure line, I can't find anything about this supposed mission. No documents, no research, no mission logs. It's like they don't even exist. Did you know about this? Elon's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I've been asking myself the same thing. If this mission existed, it was off the books, completely hidden from public view. But that doesn't mean it's not real. We might be dealing with something bigger than we thought. Ben thought about it for a moment. What if this was never supposed to be discovered? What if someone wanted this mission to remain a secret for some reason? Elon's silence on the other end spoke volumes. After a long pause, he finally spoke. We'll have to proceed with caution. If Samuel's story is true, then this could be a massive breach of trust and potentially dangerous. Keep investigating and keep your team in check. We need answers. Ben nodded, but deep inside, He knew that whatever was happening on Mars, it wasn't just about testing technology anymore. This mission was about survival, and not just against the environment. Despite the lack of official records, Ben kept digging. He pulled up old data from satellite imagery and Mars rover missions. Maybe he could find some indication of the other team's activities, something that would confirm or deny Samuel's story. Then, one night, he found something. It was buried deep in the archive communications, an encrypted file dated 3 years ago. The file header read, Operation Ghost. His heart skipped a beat. With the help of Emily and John, the engineer, Ben worked to decrypt the file. After hours of painstaking effort, the document finally came through. The file contained coordinates that matched the location where Samuel had been found. The more Ben read, the clearer it became. The file described a clandestine mission, one that was supposed to be monitoring Mars for long-term colonization. The mission had gone dark. A team of 5 had been sent out to set up a base, but they had lost contact with Earth within weeks of their arrival. The file didn't explain why, only that the project had been marked as compromised and classified. Ben's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but the implications were enormous. "Emily," Ben called out, summoning her to the control room. "I found something. This operation wasn't a fantasy. Samuel's telling the truth. But why the secrecy? Why was it hidden?" Emily scanned the data on the screen, her brow furrowing. "This is massive. If this was part of a government mission, why wasn't it disclosed to the public? What was the real reason they were out here?" Ben shook his head. "I don't know, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface." With this new information, Ben began to question Samuel's true identity. How did he survive in the harsh Martian desert for so long? Why had he been left behind by a mission that was supposed to have strict protocols in place? And what was the connection between Samuel and Operation Ghost? When Ben confronted Samuel in private, the stranger's demeanor had shifted. Gone was the disoriented, weary man who had stumbled into their colony. The Samuel sitting across from Ben was calculating, guarded. "Samuel, we've been reviewing some files," Ben began cautiously. "Your story doesn't line up with the official records. How did you end up on Mars? And why was your mission erased from the logs?" Samuel's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, he seemed to hesitate. "I told you," he said slowly, his voice steady. "I was part of a team. Things went wrong. We lost contact. I was the only one who made it out." Ben wasn't convinced. "We found records of an Operation Ghost. It matches the location you were found in. Was that your mission?" Samuel's face darkened. For a long moment, he said nothing, then leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I was part of that mission, but I wasn't supposed to survive. None of us were." Ben felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Samuel sighed deeply, as if the weight of his words was finally sinking in. That mission wasn't about exploring Mars. It wasn't about research. It was a test, an experiment. The goal wasn't colonization, Ben. It was control. The mission was a way to test human limits. Test how much we could endure under extreme conditions. Mars wasn't the experiment. The crew was. Ben felt his stomach twist. "You're saying the mission was a controlled failure?" Samuel nodded slowly. "We were left there on purpose. For months, we were cut off from communication, forced to survive. It was a test to see how people would react to extreme isolation, how long it would take before our mental states deteriorated. And we weren't supposed to make it." The weight of Samuel's revelation hit Ben like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a mission gone wrong. It was part of something far more sinister. The idea of using a human crew as experimental subjects on Mars, no matter the justification, was deeply troubling. "And you?" Ben asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "How did you survive? Why are you here?" Samuel looked down at his hands, his voice quiet but filled with pain. "I don't know. I wasn't supposed to. But when they left me, I realized something. It wasn't just about survival. It was about something else. A bigger picture. And I needed to warn you." "Warn us about what?" Ben asked, his voice strained. "There's more going on than you know. They're watching. And I'm not the only one who survived." The air in the control room grew thick with tension. Samuel's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, dark and foreboding. The more Ben thought about it, the more disturbing it became. A secret mission, designed to test human limits, and now the survivors were being watched? The idea that they were all part of an experiment they didn't know about was not just unsettling. It was a betrayal on a cosmic scale. Ben leaned back in his chair, trying to process everything Samuel had just revealed. You're telling me the mission wasn't about exploration? That it was about testing us? What kind of test? Samuel's face was grim, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes, a knowledge that Ben didn't fully comprehend. The truth is, Mars wasn't the real focus. It was the people who came to Mars. The whole point of the mission was to see how we would break, how long we could last before we started turning on each other. Ben's mind reeled. So, it was like a psychological experiment? Samuel nodded slowly. Yes, and it wasn't just about survival. They wanted to know how long it would take before people gave up, how long before we cracked under pressure. But they didn't tell us any of this. We were just pawns in someone else's game. Ben clenched his fists, the anger bubbling up. Who did this? Who's behind it? Samuel looked down at the floor, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know. I thought it was a government program at first, but I was wrong. It was bigger than that. The whole mission was funded by a shadow group, people with more power than I could ever imagine. The kind of people who don't care about life. They only care about control. Ben felt a chill run through him. Control over what? Everything, Samuel said, his eyes flashing. Over space. Over humanity. Over the future. As the crew processed this new, terrifying information, it became clear that everything they thought they knew about the mission was a lie. Ben wasn't sure what to do with the truth Samuel had revealed. It was hard to believe, but the evidence was starting to line up. The strange disappearance of the original team, the lack of any official records, and now the cryptic, almost paranoid warnings from Samuel. There was no longer any doubt. Mars wasn't just a destination. It was a proving ground. But Ben had to consider the bigger question. How deep did this go? Was their mission, his mission, also part of a much larger, more dangerous plan? He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The crew was split on how to handle Samuel's warnings. Some, like Emily, felt they should take his advice seriously, investigate further, and prepare for the worst. Others, including John, the engineer, were skeptical. They wanted to continue with the mission, to ignore the conspiracy theories and focus on building a future for humanity on Mars. But Ben wasn't so sure anymore. Late one night, as he sat alone in the control room, going over the encrypted files again, a message flashed across the screen. It was an encrypted transmission, one that wasn't from Earth. Ben's heart skipped a beat as he opened it. The message was short, to the point. We know you found out. Do not trust Samuel. There is much more at stake than you realize. Do not investigate further. The message ended with a code, a series of numbers that, when input into the system, revealed a location. Deep in the Martian desert, near the coordinates where Samuel had claimed to be stranded. Ben's mind raced. Who was sending this message? And why would they warn him away from the truth? It seemed clear now that someone was monitoring them closely. They didn't want them to uncover whatever was buried in that desolate landscape. The crew gathered in the main chamber the next day, Ben's mind still reeling from the encrypted warning. He knew they had to act, and fast. Samuel, Ben said, his voice firm as he turned to face the newcomer. We need to go back to where you were. The coordinates you gave us match up with something. Something hidden. Samuel's eyes flashed with a mix of fear and desperation. You don't understand, Ben. It's not safe. The group that's watching us, they'll do anything to stop you. They won't let you find what's out there. Ben held up a hand to silence him. We don't have a choice. If we don't go, we might never understand what happened to your team. We need to know the truth. And I'm not backing down. Samuel stood, his face filled with hesitation and fear. You're making a mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with. They won't stop until you're just like me, alone and forgotten. Despite the warnings, Ben's mind was made up. We're going. Whether you come with us or not, we're going to find out what's buried out there. Preparations for the journey began immediately. The crew equipped themselves with the necessary tools, including rover units, drones, and emergency supplies. Emily and John worked together to ensure the vehicles were in top condition, while Samuel, though reluctant, agreed to help guide them through the desert. The coordinates were located far from the colony, in an area that hadn't been explored yet, beyond the safety boundaries they had carefully set up for the mission. As they set off across the barren landscape, the tension was palpable. The red Martian dust swirled in the thin atmosphere, and the air felt heavy with uncertainty. Every rock, every shadow in the distance, seemed to hide secrets they weren't prepared for. After hours of travel, they arrived at the location. The ground was cracked and uneven, but there were signs of something buried beneath the surface: broken equipment, scattered debris, and strange markings in the dust. It was clear that something had been here, something large and purposeful. Ben's heart raced as they began to dig. The drone hovered overhead, scanning the area for any hidden compartments beneath the surface. After what seemed like hours, the drone's sensors finally detected a large underground structure. "This is it," Ben said, almost whispering. "This is where they were." The crew worked together to open the hatch they uncovered, revealing a long-forgotten underground base. The interior was eerily silent, and everything appeared to have been abandoned in haste. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around the dimly lit corridors. "What happened here?" Emily whispered. "I don't know," Ben replied, his voice strained. "But I have a feeling we're about to find out." They moved cautiously through the base, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon something they weren't expecting: a wall of glass panels, behind which were monitors, blinking with data. One of the screens flickered, and suddenly a familiar face appeared. It was an older man, someone Ben didn't recognize, but his expression was cold, calculating. The message that followed was short and chilling. "You shouldn't have come. The experiment isn't over." The screen cut to black. "What do you think the hidden base holds? Who is behind the experiment, and what do they want with the crew? Should Ben and his team keep investigating, or is it too dangerous? Share your thoughts below. What do you think is really going on with Mars colonization?" The screen flickered out, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The words of the mysterious figure lingered in the air. "The experiment isn't over." Ben's heart raced as the gravity of the situation hit him. They weren't just on Mars to build a colony. They were part of something much darker, something they couldn't yet fully understand. And whatever was buried here in the abandoned base was the key to everything. The base was eerily silent as they explored further, their footsteps reverberating in the stillness. The walls were covered in strange symbols and data streams, none of which Ben or the crew could decipher. It was clear that this place had been abandoned in a hurry. Equipment was left half operational, documents scattered around, and some terminals were still blinking with active data feeds. "Look at this," Emily called from the far side of the room, where she had found a computer terminal still powered on. She tapped a few keys, and the screen came to life. "Is that?" John squinted as the screen displayed old mission reports, names of crew members, and Project Omega. The name sent a chill down Ben's spine. He stepped closer to read the data. The files detailed a project that went far beyond the scope of any regular Mars mission. Omega was designed to test the psychological resilience of a small group of individuals isolated on the planet for extended periods, pushing them to the edge of human endurance. The report didn't just focus on survival. It was about breaking people, manipulating them into extreme mental and physical stress. "It wasn't just isolation," Ben muttered, reading the document aloud. "They were deliberately torturing these people. For what? To see how long it would take for them to snap? To see who could endure?" Samuel, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward, his face pale. "I told you. It was never about Mars. It was about control. They wanted to see how far humans could go when pushed beyond their limits." Ben glanced at him. "But why? What's the endgame here?" "I don't know," Samuel said, his voice strained. "All I know is that this isn't the end. You think you've found answers, but you've only scratched the surface." As they continued to sift through the data, they uncovered even more unsettling information. The Omega Project wasn't just a series of isolated experiments. It was part of a much larger plan to control the future of human colonization in space. The report detailed plans for similar operations on other planets, all under the guise of peaceful exploration. But the real goal was control. Control over the people chosen for these missions, control over the resources, and ultimately control over the future of humanity itself. Ben felt sick. This is insane. They've been doing this to people for years, and now they're using us. We're just more test subjects in their game. But why are they watching us now? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Why go through all this trouble? Before Ben could answer, the terminal beeped and a new message appeared. One that wasn't there before. The same cold face appeared on the screen, but this time, it spoke directly to them. I see you've uncovered the truth, but there's something you don't understand. The experiment is ongoing, and you are still part of it. There are more of us out there, more survivors, and they will stop at nothing to make sure you fail. The screen cut off abruptly. The room fell into stunned silence. Ben felt his pulse quicken as his mind raced. More survivors? What did that mean? Were they part of Project Omega too? And who were these people watching them? Who had the power to control a Mars mission, to wipe records, and manipulate the truth on such a massive scale? We need to get back to the colony, Ben said finally, breaking the silence. We can't stay here. We're not safe here. But as they turned to leave the underground base, a loud alarm sounded. The base was locked down. They've activated the security systems, Samuel said, his voice rising in panic. We're trapped. Ben's mind raced as he tried to think of an escape. The door was sealed, and there was no way out through the main entrance. He turned to the others, his voice urgent. We need to find another exit. Now. As they scrambled through the darkened hallways, a new threat emerged, distant, echoing footsteps. Someone, or something, was coming. Ben and the crew sprinted through the base, dodging through corridors, desperately searching for a way out. The sound of boots on metal grew louder, closer, as the security system locked down all other routes. Panic set in as they realized they were running out of time and options. We're not going to make it out, John said, his voice tight with fear. We need to figure something out fast. Over here, Emily shouted, pointing to a side corridor that led deeper into the base. There's an emergency escape tunnel. It might lead us outside. They sprinted down the hallway, with the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. As they reached the end of the tunnel, the flickering lights above them suddenly died, plunging them into total darkness. Move, Ben shouted, his voice rising. They had no time to hesitate. They followed Emily's lead, their hands brushing the cold walls as they stumbled forward in the dark. Suddenly, a door opened in front of them, and a figure stepped out of the shadows. Stop right there, the voice commanded. Ben froze. It was another survivor, another person from Project Omega. The figure that emerged from the shadows was tall, dressed in a dark, form-fitting suit. The dim light from the corridor illuminated just enough of their face to reveal a calm, yet unsettling expression. They stood in the doorway, blocking the crew's path, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Who are you? Ben demanded, his voice firm but strained. The adrenaline from their desperate flight had made his heart pound in his chest. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, they studied Ben and the crew with a cold, appraising gaze. Then, finally, the person spoke. You're not supposed to be here. The voice was low and measured, with an unsettling calmness. But I suppose I can't say I'm surprised. You're all just pieces in a game, and you've gone too far. Ben's mind raced. A game? What do you mean by that? Who are you? What's going on here? The figure sighed, as though the answers should be obvious. The names, the faces, they don't matter. I'm just like you, one of the many chosen for Project Omega. But unlike you, I've accepted what's happening. This is the way things are. The way they've always been. Ben's stomach twisted in knots. He had to get answers, and fast. What is Project Omega? Who is they? What do they want with us? The figure paused for a long moment, almost as if deciding how much to reveal. Then, with a quiet, resigned tone, they said, We were all selected for this mission, this experiment. The people behind it don't care about colonization or human expansion. They care about control. And they've been testing us testing humanity for years. They've been watching everything. They want to know how far we'll go before we break. And when we do break, that's when they take the data. That's when they decide if humanity is ready for the future or if we need to be reset. Ben's mind struggled to grasp the magnitude of what the person was saying. The experiment had been about control all along, but the more he heard, the more it sounded like they were preparing for something far more sinister. But why? Why use people like this? Why take us on these missions if they're only trying to break us? Emily asked, her voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and fear. The figure's eyes softened slightly, though there was no warmth in their gaze. Because humanity is flawed. You don't realize it, but you're being tested to see if you're strong enough, resilient enough, to withstand what's coming. We, are preparing for something much bigger than Mars. The survival of the species, the control of our destiny. They need to know that the human race can endure when it's pushed to the absolute limit. Ben felt his head spin. Who are they? Who's pulling the strings here? The figure looked at him as if the answer was painfully obvious. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But the truth is, it's not just the government or some corporation. It's the people in the shadows, the ones who've always had the power to shape the course of humanity. They've been setting the stage for the next phase of human evolution. The crew was silent, the weight of the figure's words pressing down on them like a physical force. Ben, however, wasn't ready to accept this fatalistic view of their mission. There had to be more to the story, something they were missing. If they gave in to the belief that this was all part of some grand, inevitable plan, they were no better than pawns in the experiment. We won't just accept this, Ben said, his voice growing stronger. We're going to expose the truth. We're going to end this experiment, whatever it takes. The figure's expression remained unchanged. You can't end it. You never could. You're already in it too deep. The experiment is already finished. The data's been collected. And whether you like it or not, you're all part of the final stage. Ben's pulse quickened, his mind racing. What do you mean by the final stage? The figure stepped forward slightly, lowering their voice to a near whisper. The last test. It's coming, and you're going to play a part in it. Ben's heart dropped. What last test? What's coming? But before the figure could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors again. The door to the emergency escape tunnel was slammed shut, cutting them off from their only means of retreat. We're not alone anymore, the figure said with a grim smile. And you have no choice but to face it. The crew was trapped, the cold realization dawning on them that whatever came next would be the ultimate challenge. The mysterious figure, however, stepped aside and motioned toward a large screen that flickered to life, showing the familiar face of the cold, calculating figure they had seen earlier. You've made it this far, the voice on the screen said, sounding more like a distant observation than a warning. But the real test begins now. Ben felt his blood run cold. The real test? What could be worse than everything they'd already faced? What more could they possibly be subjected to? The figure on the screen continued, unaffected by their fear. You're about to experience the final phase of the experiment. You've been conditioned, manipulated, and tested to this point. Now we'll see how far you can really go. The lights in the underground base dimmed, and the sound of doors locking and alarms blaring filled the air. Panic spread through the group like wildfire. No, Emily said, her voice trembling. We have to get out of here. Now. But the figure on the screen spoke again, his voice ominous and final. Escape is not an option. You've crossed a line. Now, you will either break or become part of the next phase of human evolution. The screen went dark. The room was plunged into silence. The crew is facing the final phase of the experiment. What do you think this last test will be? Will Ben and his team find a way to escape, or will they succumb to the experiment's manipulations? Is there any hope left for them? Share your theories below. What will happen next in the dark mystery of Mars? The lights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls of the underground base. The eerie silence that followed the voice on the screen seemed to weigh heavily on the crew. Ben stood motionless, his mind a whirlwind of questions and fear. What did they mean by the final phase? And more importantly, could they survive it? The figure from before, the one who had been hiding in the shadows, stepped forward, now clearly an ally in this twisted game. Their face was hard, but there was a hint of something else. Regret, perhaps? They spoke in a hushed tone, almost like they were warning them of what was to come. "You're not going to like what happens next," they said. Ben swallowed hard. "What do we need to do? How do we survive?" The survivor's eyes flickered nervously, but they remained composed. "There's no escaping this place anymore. They've already locked down the entire facility. The test is already underway. And the worst part is, you don't have control over the outcome." Ben clenched his fists. "Tell me what's going to happen. I need to understand." The figure hesitated, but then they spoke, each word heavy with the weight of the truth. "You're being forced into a psychological game. They've been tracking every move you've made, every choice you've ever had to make. And now, they're going to push you to your limits. They want to see who breaks first, who sacrifices the most, who betrays." Ben's stomach dropped. "Betray? You mean?" "They want to see if you'll turn on each other," the figure finished. "How far will you go to survive? That's the final test. Trust doesn't exist here anymore. You're all strangers, even if you've been together for months. And once they push you to the brink, you'll see who you really are." Before Ben could respond, the walls around them began to hum with activity. The room they were in seemed to shift, the air growing heavier. A low, mechanical voice echoed through the space, coming from speakers they hadn't noticed before. "Phase 1. Isolation begins now." Suddenly, the crew was separated. The metal walls around them began to shift and divide, cutting them off from one another. The corridors that had once seemed endless now felt claustrophobic, their paths segmented into smaller and smaller spaces. Panic set in as Ben was separated from Emily, John, and Samuel. Ben's heart raced as the realization hit him. This was part of the test. The walls were closing in, not physically, but emotionally. He was alone. In a matter of moments, Ben found himself locked in a small, windowless room. There was nothing but a cot, a table, and a small terminal on the wall. He tried to calm his breathing, but it was difficult. The silence felt suffocating. Every few seconds, a soft beep echoed from the terminal. A message flashed on the screen. "Choose your next action wisely. Time is running out." Ben pressed the button that activated the screen. A series of questions appeared, each one more invasive than the last. His chest tightened as he read them. "Do you trust your teammates? Would you sacrifice one to save the others? What would you do if you knew one of them was lying to you?" The questions came faster now, one after the other. The screen was relentless, pushing him to make choices he didn't want to think about. He slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. How was this a test of survival? It wasn't about physical strength. It was about manipulation, about breaking trust, breaking bonds. Meanwhile, Emily was in a separate room, equally isolated. She paced back and forth, her mind racing. What was happening? Why were they being treated like this? She approached the terminal, her fingers trembling as she activated it. She, too, was presented with a series of questions, all designed to make her question the others. How far are you willing to go to protect yourself? Would you deceive your teammates if it meant saving your own life? Is loyalty really worth your survival? Emily bit her lip, her mind torn between the options. She wasn't like this. She trusted her team. But the words on the screen, the scenarios they presented, felt real. The pressure was mounting. "I can't," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "I can't do this." Then the screen flashed a new message. "You must choose, Emily, or the game will choose for you." John was also trapped in a different room, wrestling with the same impossible choices. The psychological weight of the experiment was becoming unbearable. With each question, each prompt, the trust he had in his teammates began to fray at the edges. Was Ben really the leader he had seemed? Was Emily truly someone he could count on? He slapped his hands on the desk, frustrated. This isn't real. This isn't real. It can't be. But deep down, he knew it was. The walls had already closed in. The choices had already been made for them, and all they could do now was react. Back in Ben's isolated room, the terminal beeped once more. He leaned forward, his hands shaking as he clicked the message that had appeared. It was a personal message, one directed only at him. "Ben, The message read, "We've been watching you. We know you're trying to resist, but you have no idea what's at stake. Your survival depends on one simple truth. If you don't choose to sacrifice them, they will sacrifice you." Ben's blood ran cold. The message was clear, a direct threat, but also a warning. It wasn't just a test anymore. The stakes were real. As the hours dragged on, the crew continued to face increasingly difficult decisions. With each new question, their unity was tested. The lines between ally and enemy began to blur. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about who they could trust, and whether trust was even possible in a world like this. Then, as if on cue, a final message appeared across all their terminals, each one flashing in bright red. Phase 2. You have made your choices. Now, it's time to see how far you will go. You have 24 hours to decide. Will you turn on each other to survive, or will you work together? The clock is ticking. Ben stared at the screen, his mind whirling. This was no longer a mission. It was a game of manipulation, of mind games, of survival at all costs. But the cost was steep. The question was no longer if they would break. It was how they would break. The crew is now divided, isolated, and facing the most intense psychological challenge yet. Will Ben and his team hold together or turn against each other? What choice would you make if you were in their position? Do you think there's still hope for them to survive this twisted experiment? Share your thoughts below. How do you think this will end? The pressure of the final test was beginning to tear at the crew. Ben could feel the walls closing in, not just physically but mentally, as the relentless questions and scenarios pushed them further and further from each other. Trust had always been the foundation of their mission, but now, trust seemed like a distant memory, a fragile thread that was about to snap. Ben sat on the floor of his small, sterile room, staring at the terminal in front of him. The question that had been flashing on the screen haunted him. Would you sacrifice one of your teammates to save the others? There was no easy answer. In a way, they were all in the same boat, trapped, manipulated, and being pushed to the brink of their sanity. But Ben refused to believe that this was their only choice. They couldn't let the experiment win. Meanwhile, Emily paced back and forth in her own room, her mind a chaotic storm of thoughts. The question she was being forced to answer felt like a cruel joke, as if someone was trying to turn her against her friends. She had always been the team's moral compass, the one who believed that they could succeed on Mars as long as they stuck together. But now she was questioning everything. The terminal in front of her beeped again, displaying the same type of question that Ben had received. If you had to choose between saving your own life or your team's, which would you pick? Emily froze. This wasn't just a question. It was a manipulation. It was designed to force her to think about survival in the most brutal way possible. She had no doubt that the others were facing the same impossible decisions. I can't do this," she whispered, feeling the walls of her isolation closing in. Her thoughts were interrupted when the terminal beeped again, flashing a new message. This time, it was different. It wasn't a question. It was a command. You have 12 hours to make a decision. If you refuse to choose, the game will choose for you. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. There was no escape from this. They were all being manipulated, pushed to their breaking points. And as much as she wanted to believe they could survive this, part of her was starting to wonder if they already had. In his room, John was no better off. The terminal kept flashing new questions at him, each one more disorienting than the last. His mind was reeling from everything that had happened, from the betrayal of the mission, to the terrifying discoveries about Project Omega, to the growing tension between him and the crew. He had always prided himself on being a team player, the one who had always believed that unity was their strength. But now, in the face of these impossible choices, he wasn't so sure. His fingers hovered over the screen, torn between the questions. Should he sacrifice someone for the sake of the group? Could he really live with the consequences? The terminal beeped once more, and a new message appeared. The clock is ticking, John. There is no time left for indecision. Choose wisely. John felt the pressure building, a weight that pressed down on him like 1,000 tons. If he made the wrong choice, he might lose everything. But if he didn't choose at all, he might lose his humanity. He slammed his hand against the desk in frustration. This is wrong. All of it. But the terminal didn't care. It kept flashing the same cruel questions. Samuel, the most stoic of the group, had been silent for the last several hours, sitting in his own room, staring at the terminal. Unlike the others, Samuel had always been aware of the darker side of human nature. He had been through psychological tests before, training exercises, simulations, but nothing like this. Nothing had prepared him for this. The cruelty, the manipulation. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. As the hours passed, Samuel's thoughts turned inward. He wasn't sure whether the others were breaking down the way he was, but he could feel the pressure of the game, the need to make a decision that would change everything. The loneliness, the isolation. It was all part of the plan. And the more time that passed, the more he realized that this wasn't just an experiment for them. It was an experiment for him, to see how far he would go, how far he would bend before he broke. Samuel looked at the screen again. The flashing questions felt like a mocking voice, urging him to make a choice. Will you betray your teammates to save yourself? A new message appeared immediately after. You have no choice. Do it. Samuel's fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. He didn't want to make a choice. He didn't want to betray the people he had come to trust. But he knew, deep down, that the system had already won. It had already cornered them into a place where no one could come out unscathed. With a heavy sigh, Samuel made his choice. Back in the central hub of the base, the final countdown had begun. The digital clock on the wall counted down the hours, minutes, and seconds. Each passing second brought them closer to the endgame. The team had no way of knowing who had made which choices, or what the consequences would be once the timer hit zero. But as the clock ticked down, something began to change. A faint hum began to fill the room, coming from the speakers embedded in the walls. It was a sound that didn't seem natural, an eerie frequency that made the crew's skin crawl. And then, the lights flickered, twice. Ben clenched his fists, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that was starting to consume him. He didn't know if it was the isolation or the constant pressure of the questions, but something was happening. Something was coming. And when the final moment arrived, they would have no choice but to face whatever came next. The terminal in front of him flashed again. The time is up. You have all made your choices. Ben stared at the words on the screen. There was no turning back now. The decision had been made. The experiment had run its course. The final phase of the experiment is now complete. What do you think will happen to the crew as they face the consequences of their choices? Will they manage to hold on to their humanity, or will the experiment succeed in breaking them? Do you think Ben and his team still have a chance to escape, or is it already too late? Share your thoughts below. What do you think will happen next? The cold silence of the room was shattered by a sudden, sharp buzz, and the terminals in front of Ben, Emily, John, Samuel, and the others flashed with a new message. The countdown had finished, and now they were about to learn the result of their choices. Phase 1 complete. The final stage begins. Ben felt a chill run down his spine. The words were simple, but they carried a heavy weight. The quiet hum in the background grew louder, more insistent, as if the very walls of the base were alive, watching their every move. He quickly glanced around at the others, though they were all isolated in separate rooms. There was no way to communicate with them now, not until the next phase began. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the terminal, his mind racing. The questions they had answered, each one so carefully crafted to break their resolve, felt like distant memories. But the fear was still there, gnawing at him. Had they made the right choices? What consequences awaited them? What did they, the shadowy figures pulling the strings, want now? A new message appeared on Ben's screen. The time for hesitation has passed. The truth must come out. You will now face the consequences of your actions. Do you accept them? Ben stared at the screen for a long moment, his heart pounding. Accept them? There was no choice anymore. He had already chosen, along with the others. They all had. But what had it cost them? The whole experiment had been designed to test one thing above all: the ability to push people to their limits, to see how far they would go in order to survive. Now, they would find out what the price was. Ben hesitated for just a moment before responding. Yes. The screen flashed with a response. Very well. The consequences are as follows. Each of you will face a series of trials based on the choices you made. Some of you will be rewarded, some will be punished, and some— The screen flickered again, as if hesitating, before continuing— may never be seen again. The words hit Ben like a punch to the gut. Never be seen again? Was that a threat? Or was it a warning of something worse? Before he could process further, the terminal blinked once more. You will now receive instructions. Prepare yourselves. Ben was shaken. The reality of the experiment, the game they had been forced into, was setting in. There was no going back. They had each made their choices, and now they would have to live with them, or die by them. The door to Ben's room slid open with a hiss, the sharp sound echoing in the empty corridor. He stepped forward, his muscles tense. There was no telling what awaited him outside, but he knew one thing. It was time to face whatever came next. He moved down the narrow, dimly lit corridor, each step echoing in the silence. The walls around him seemed to press in, like they were closing off his options, reducing his world to the one path ahead. It was the same feeling he'd had ever since the experiment had begun, a sense of inevitability. Ahead, the corridor opened into a large chamber. The lights flickered above, casting eerie shadows across the cold floor. In the center of the room stood a large, metallic platform, surrounded by a circle of monitors and screens. A single chair sat in the middle of the platform, its back turned toward him. Ben stepped forward, wariness creeping up his spine. He didn't know what this was, but he felt it was a test, another layer of the twisted game. The chair seemed to beckon him, and against his better judgment, he walked toward it. As he sat down, the chair locked into place, the cold metal pressing against his arms and legs. The screens around him buzzed to life. A voice, one that he recognized as the cold, detached tone from earlier, echoed through the chamber. You have entered the first trial, Ben. In this test, you will face the consequences of your choices. We will reveal the decisions you made, and you must answer for them. Ben's pulse quickened. He felt the pressure building again, just like it had back on the base when the questions started to feel more real. His chest tightened. He wanted to fight, to refuse, but he knew there was no turning back. Your first decision was whether or not you would betray your teammates to save yourself. Do you regret that decision? The voice asked. Ben's mind raced. He had chosen survival, just like the others had. He hadn't betrayed anyone outright, but he hadn't exactly made the choice to save anyone either. His decision had been selfish, a last-ditch effort to hold on to what little control he had left. I don't regret it, Ben answered, his voice steady, though his insides churned. I did what I had to do. The screens flickered again, and the voice responded. Very well. You chose survival, but survival often comes with a price. Suddenly, the room darkened. The monitors around Ben began to flash images of the others: Emily, John, Samuel. Each one of them isolated in their own trial, forced to answer for their own decisions. The images flickered like a broken television signal, each one showing the turmoil and pain in their eyes. Ben clenched his fists. He knew they were all going through the same thing. But were they still together in spirit? Could they hold on to their unity after everything they'd endured? You are not alone, Ben, the voice continued, but you are all connected by the choices you made. The others will face their own consequences. Some will break, others will rise. Before Ben could process the implications of the voice's words, the lights above him flickered one more time. The monitors went dark, and the entire chamber seemed to tremble. The metallic platform beneath him groaned, as if something inside it was shifting. Then, a new voice boomed through the chamber, an unfamiliar voice, one that sent a chill down Ben's spine. You've done well to make it this far. But now you must understand, the experiment is over. What you have been through was never just a test. It was a selection. And now, you must decide if you are worthy of survival. The game is not over, Ben. It has only just begun. Ben's heart stopped. Selection? Survival? What did that mean? Were they truly done with the trials? Or was this something even worse waiting for them? The room shifted once again, and Ben felt his stomach lurch as the floor beneath him opened up, revealing a dark, yawning chasm. The monitors blinked back to life, showing the faces of his teammates once again. each one in their own chamber, facing their own horrors. "It's time to choose, Ben," the voice said. "Do you trust the others enough to work together, or will you betray them once again?" The air felt thick, almost suffocating. Ben's mind spun as the platform beneath him groaned and shifted. The lights above him flickered again, casting ominous shadows across the room. His heart raced, and the words from the unseen voice echoed in his mind. "It's time to choose, Ben. Will you trust the others enough to work together, or will you betray them once again?" Ben had made decisions before, choices about survival, about strategy, even about his own conscience. But this was different. There was no clear path, no way to know who was right or wrong. The experiment had broken down every moral boundary, every ounce of trust they had worked so hard to build. It was no longer about survival. It was about the one thing they had left, control, and who was willing to surrender it. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise, the panic. This wasn't just a test. It wasn't just a game anymore. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Meanwhile, Emily sat alone in her own dark chamber. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles ached. The room around her was eerily silent. The only sound, the faint whir of machinery deep within the walls. She couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on her. The terminal in front of her beeped, its harsh tone cutting through the stillness. The words on the screen were blunt, direct. "You must make a choice. Will you cooperate with your teammates, or will you choose to escape alone?" She swallowed hard. Escape? The very thought of it sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had chosen the group. She had always chosen the group. But the more she thought about it, the more the isolation gnawed at her. She had been alone for so long now, forced to make decisions without guidance, without the camaraderie she had always relied on. "I didn't sign up for this," she muttered, staring at the screen. But the truth was, no one had. None of them had ever expected it to go this far. The terminal beeped again, this time showing a new message. "Your time is running out. You must decide. Will you remain loyal to your team, or will you seize the opportunity to escape while you still can?" Her breath caught in her throat. Escape. Could she really leave the others behind? Could she go on, knowing they would still be trapped here? Knowing they would suffer the same cruel fate? Back in his own room, Samuel wasn't doing much better. The screen in front of him had shown him the same stark choice as Emily, cooperate or betray. And just like her, he was torn. Samuel had always prided himself on being pragmatic, on being the one who saw the world as it really was. But this was different. This was not the world he knew. This was something much darker, something beyond his understanding. Every trial, every twist in the game, had chipped away at his certainty, his conviction. The voice came again, cold and calculated. "Samuel, you chose to protect yourself over the others. Now you must face the consequences. Would you do the same again if given the chance?" He stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. Could he honestly say that he wouldn't? Could he look into the faces of his teammates and say that his choices hadn't been about him, about his own survival? "Yes," he muttered under his breath, his voice rough. "I would. I had to." The voice paused, then responded, "Very well. But remember, your actions have consequences. You are now bound by them." In a different part of the base, John was experiencing his own crisis. He had never imagined that it would come to this, facing his own team in a game where loyalty was a luxury they could no longer afford. The question that had plagued him since the start of the experiment loomed larger now than ever. Would you sacrifice one of your teammates for the sake of the mission? John's hand hovered over the terminal, trembling. He could already hear the voices of the others in his mind. He had spent years working alongside them, trusting them, relying on them. But now, everything had changed. He couldn't trust the system. He couldn't trust the game. But he wasn't sure he could trust his teammates either. Would they trust him in the end? Would they trust each other? Or was it too late for that? The message on the terminal flickered, urging him to answer. "Choose, John. Your teammates' fates are in your hands." Ben's stomach turned as he listened to the disembodied voice speaking to him, telling him to make a choice. Behind him, the floor began to shift, the walls grinding and creaking. It was as though the entire base was alive, breathing in sync with the choices they had all made. And then, just as he thought it couldn't get worse, a new message appeared on the terminal. You may choose to escape together, but there is one final twist. The moment you choose, one of you will be eliminated. The choice will be yours, if you can live with it. Ben's heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? Elimination? One of them would have to die? The walls of the chamber seemed to close in on him, and for the first time, he felt a surge of panic. The options in front of him now were almost too cruel to comprehend. He could choose to trust the others, to escape together. But at what cost? Someone had to die for them to leave. Or he could betray the others, save himself, but live with the weight of that decision forever. There was no right answer, no way to win. It was the final game, and this was the last card they would be dealt. Ben looked at the terminal in front of him, his mind racing. He had to make a decision. He had to decide who would live and who would die. Could he live with that burden? Before he could answer, a loud alarm blared throughout the facility. The lights above flickered and then went dark, plunging the room into total darkness. The final choice is upon you, the voice boomed, more forceful now. You have 5 minutes to make a decision. Choose wisely. Choose quickly. Ben's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. He could almost hear his teammates calling to him, but there was nothing he could do. The game was already in motion, and they had no way of escaping it. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. A countdown began, ticking down the final seconds. The game is ending, Ben. The clock is ticking. The countdown ticked down relentlessly. The digital clock on the terminal flashed. 3 o'clock, 2:59, 2:58. The seconds bled into one another, each one feeling heavier than the last. Ben's mind was a storm of confusion, guilt, and desperation. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing tighter with every second that passed. You have 2 minutes left to make your choice, the voice boomed, cold and mechanical. Remember, one of you will die. Choose wisely. Ben's hands trembled as they hovered over the terminal's interface. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like an unbearable force. He had no answers, no solutions. How could anyone make a decision like this? How could he choose between his survival and the lives of those he'd come to trust, to depend on? He closed his eyes, blocking out the flashing numbers and the voice's unyielding commands. He thought of Emily, of John, of Samuel. They had all been through so much together. Their struggles were his struggles. They had shared pain, fear, and hope, even if it had seemed fleeting at times. Could he really choose one of them to die? Was there any possibility that they could escape this game with their lives intact? A sudden thought broke through the haze of his mind. Could they all escape? Ben's heart skipped a beat. The voice had said, "One of you will die." But had it said it was because of their decision? Or was it an ultimatum set in motion by something greater, something beyond their control? A possibility, an unlikely but faint glimmer of hope, began to take shape in his mind. What if there was a way to escape without sacrificing anyone? What if they could all survive together? In her own chamber, Emily sat frozen. The terminal's words haunted her like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Will you sacrifice your teammates for the sake of escape? Her heart hammered in her chest. Escape. She had dreamed of it, of the moment when this nightmare would be over. But now, facing the reality of that escape, the weight of it was unbearable. She knew what it meant. It meant betraying everything she had fought for, everything she had believed in. But then, realization struck her like a thunderclap. This wasn't about survival. This was about humanity, about what they had all been through together. She couldn't betray that. The game had designed them to turn on each other, to pit them against one another. But Emily had a choice. She could play into the system and allow the fear to control her, or she could defy it. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, something worth holding on to. Her fingers hovered over the terminal, then slowly, deliberately, she typed, "I won't betray them." The screen blinked and disappeared, replaced by the countdown clock. 1 minute left. Samuel's heart raced. The words on the terminal tormented him. Would you sacrifice yourself to save the others? He had always believed in his own survival instinct, always believed that he could make it through anything. But now, as the clock ticked down and the weight of his decisions pressed on him, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was trying to make things right. He had made choices before that had hurt the others. But now, he saw his role clearly. He wasn't just a player in this game. He was part of something bigger. He had seen the cracks in the system, the way it twisted and manipulated them, but he hadn't realized until this moment how much he needed to fight back, not just for himself but for the others, too. The decision was clear. Samuel slammed his hand down on the terminal, entering a command with the force of his own resolve. I will do whatever it takes to save them, even if it costs me. The screen flashed briefly, then showed the countdown. 0:30, 0:29, 0:28. John's eyes scanned the terminal one last time. He had been through this before. He had answered the questions, made the decisions, justified every action he had taken. But now, as the seconds slipped away, he was unsure. Every decision he had made had been based on survival, on being one step ahead. But now, survival didn't seem enough. The message on his terminal was simple, chilling. Sacrifice one of your teammates. Who will it be? John's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't do it. He couldn't pick who would live and who would die. He thought back to the early days of the experiment, before it all fell apart. He had been one of the first to band together with Emily, Samuel, and Ben. He had believed in their strength as a team, and now he was being asked to tear that team apart. In the silence of his chamber, John thought of the faces of his teammates, their hopes, their fears. How could he be the one to decide who would survive, who would not? His gut twisted in knots. The finality of the situation set in. He had to make a choice. The game would not wait. With trembling fingers, John typed a single word on the terminal, none. The countdown was down to its final seconds, and then, as the last few moments ticked away, everything stopped. The lights flickered violently, then went out entirely. For a brief, terrible moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no movement. Then, as if from nowhere, a booming voice filled the chambers, reverberating through the walls, shaking the very air they breathed. Congratulations. You have all chosen wisely. You have defied the game. A collective gasp of shock and confusion rippled through each of their chambers. What had they just done? The voice continued, now softer, almost contemplative. You have proven that even in the face of impossible choices, humanity can still prevail. You have chosen to work together. You have chosen to defy the rules. And for that, you will all be free. The words felt surreal, too incredible to believe. But as the last of the words echoed in the room, something changed. The walls around them began to dissolve, slowly fading into nothingness. The cold, sterile environment of the experiment base was gone, replaced by the warm, familiar sounds of the outside world. Ben looked around. He was standing in an open field now, surrounded by the others. Samuel, Emily, John. They were all there, alive. The sky above them was wide and blue, the sun shining brightly. It felt like a dream, a moment of impossible relief after everything they had endured. For a long moment, no one spoke. They just stood there, taking in the reality of their newfound freedom. The game was over. They had won. But the victory was bittersweet. It hadn't been easy, and the scars from the experience would remain. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they were free. They did it. Ben, Emily, Samuel, and John have survived. But at what cost? They faced unimaginable choices, tested their morals, and ultimately chose to work together. But what will they carry with them from this experience? How will it change them going forward? Share your thoughts below. What do you think they'll do next? What lessons have they learned from this twisted game? The days following their escape from the experiment felt like a blur. The world around them had returned to normal, but none of them were the same. The trauma of the game, its moral dilemmas, the constant pressure to survive, the weight of their choices, was still fresh, lingering beneath the surface. They were free, yes, but at what cost? Would they ever truly be free from the haunting memories of what they had been forced to do? Ben stood outside the small cabin they had been taken to after their escape. The sky was a deep orange as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the open field. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. No alarms, no timers, no threats. Just peace. He looked over at Emily, who stood beside him, her face pensive as she watched the sun set. Her expression was calm, but Ben could see the weight in her eyes. They all had that look now, the one that said, "We survived, but we'll never forget." "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emily glanced at him, then nodded slowly. "I think so. I'm just trying to figure out what's next." "You know?" Ben sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, it's hard to think that far ahead. After everything, it feels like there's no going back. Like we've crossed a line we can't uncross." "You mean like we've been marked by this experience?" Emily said, her voice tinged with an unexpected sharpness. "Maybe, but we still have a choice. We have our lives. We survived. That has to count for something." Ben nodded, his gaze turning back toward the horizon. They had survived. But what now? Inside the cabin, Samuel sat in front of the small fireplace, his legs pulled up to his chest. The warmth of the fire didn't seem to reach the coldness that had settled deep in his bones. His eyes stared into the flames, but his thoughts were far away, lost in the labyrinth of his mind. He had always prided himself on being the one to handle situations, to make the tough calls. But the decisions he had been forced to make during the game had shattered that sense of control. Now, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. The weight of his past choices pressed down on him. He had sacrificed so much to survive. He had betrayed his own ideals, his own beliefs, all in the name of survival. But the price of those actions? It was too much. "Do you ever wonder if it was all worth it?" Samuel asked aloud, not really expecting an answer. He looked up as John entered the room, his face unreadable. John paused at the doorway, taking in the sight of Samuel by the fire. He could see the strain on his face, the burden of their shared experience. "It wasn't about worth," John said, his voice soft. "It was about survival. But we made it. And now we have to figure out how to move on." Samuel looked up, meeting John's gaze. There was something different in his eyes, something that wasn't there before the game. But what if moving on means we never truly heal? John didn't have an answer to that. He didn't know what healing even looked like anymore. All he knew was that they had survived. They had all survived. And that was something no one could take from them. The days that followed were filled with small moments of reflection, of trying to find their place in a world that seemed almost too normal, too peaceful, after everything they had gone through. But despite the quiet, despite the feeling of freedom, there was still an unspoken tension between them. They were alive, yes, but they were also broken in ways they couldn't yet fully understand. One evening, as they sat around the cabin's dinner table, Emily spoke up. "We can't keep pretending like nothing happened. We've been through something that none of us will ever forget." Samuel looked up at her, his expression weary. "I know, but we can't keep living in the past either. We have to move forward." Ben nodded, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "How do you move forward from something like this? How do you ever feel whole again?" Emily's voice softened. "Maybe it starts with forgiveness. Forgiving ourselves for the things we had to do, for the choices we made. We can't change what happened, but we can change how we carry it." John, who had been silently listening, finally spoke. "I think we need to learn how to trust again. Trust ourselves, trust each other. Without that, everything we've been through will be for nothing." There was a long silence as the words hung in the air. Each of them was thinking the same thing. Can we ever truly trust again? But even as doubt lingered, a flicker of something else emerged: hope. They had survived. They had faced the darkest parts of their souls, and now they had the chance to rebuild, to choose a new path. As the days turned into weeks, the group began to move on, slowly and cautiously. They found work in nearby towns, blending in with the world they had once been removed from. They took small steps to reintroduce themselves to normalcy: coffee at local cafes, weekend hikes, casual conversations with strangers. It was strange and often uncomfortable, but they persisted. Ben found himself at a crossroads. The weight of the past still hung over him, but he also knew that it was up to him to decide what his future would look like. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could choose how to live with it. He wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but he knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had his teammates, his friends, and they would face whatever came next together. Emily, too, found a sense of peace in the quiet, in the ordinary moments that she had once taken for granted. She took up painting, using it as a way to channel her emotions and reflect on the journey she had been through. Samuel began working with troubled youth, hoping that by helping others find their way, he could help himself find redemption. John returned to the world of technology, but now, with a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't just want to build systems. He wanted to build something that could make a difference, something that could help others avoid the same dark path they had walked. And for the first time since the experiment, they all allowed themselves to dream, to think about the future, to think about what was possible. Months passed, and while the memories of the experiment would never fully fade, they began to lose their grip. The world outside, the world they had been so separated from, felt vast and full of possibility. They had lived through hell, but now they were standing on the other side. They had survived. They had learned that the true test wasn't the game itself, it was how they chose to live afterward. They had learned that trust, loyalty, and the ability to forgive could not be broken, no matter how dark the journey. And in the end, that was the most important lesson of all. They weren't just survivors. They were a new beginning, one that had been forged in the fires of their shared trauma, but tempered by hope and the possibility of redemption. The experiment is over. Ben, Emily, Samuel, and John have survived, but their journey is just beginning. What do you think their future holds? What would you do if you were in their place? Could you forgive yourself after such an ordeal? Share your thoughts in the comments below.